Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Fem Naruto manifested Dragon Slayer ability in fairy tale verse? Fem Naruto X Fairy Tales. Movie. Minato couldn't remember a day in his life when he didn't miss his guild. He missed his father, the guild master of his old guild. He missed how his father will always complains about the magic council in their dinners. How they were just a bunch of old farts and other things. He missed seeing his mother scolding his father for being a perverter, seeing his father arguing with his brother about the silliest of things. He missed his eccentric friends, who always found new ways to make him roll in the ground in laughter. He definitely missed the missions they used to do together, where they always seemed to get into trouble. Missed how they swung their arms around him as they tell him in their loud voices, "Welcome back," before saying they missed him. He closed his eyes and breathed in, trying to calm his aching heart. Oh, what he will do to hear those words again, but he knows with a heavy heart that he will never hear them again. After all, he left the guild after he finished his last job. He didn't speak any of his plans to his father. No, he didn't tell anyone of his plans to see his mother's home village. He had been planning to give them letter, but never found the courage to do it. He just didn't know how to tell them that he was curious about the mysterious village his mother came from. It was a village not in the maps of Earthland. A village that not many people heard of. It was a village even his father had been weary of. In the beginning, he had just hoped to learn a little bit of the culture before coming back to his guild. But things never go according to plan. His plan was simply to visit the village and get to know it before going back home, going back to his guild. The plan never involved becoming a shinobi. He loathed the idea of killing yet. Listening to those people talking about how honored they were to be a ninja changed his mind. He wanted to see what was so amazing about being a ninja, and he did find out. He did see what was so great about it. He loved the thrill of the danger, loved knowing that any minute he could be dead. He loved the fact that he was helping people, from the civilians to the lords of the country. He loved everything about being a ninja, except for the killing. Never the killing, it's the part of the job that he hated. Who would love such a horrible thing, he will never know. Yet, he knows now that people have no choice but to kill. However, a part of him apologizes over and over again for the families that lost their kids or husband or wife, as well as apologizing to his father for the choices he made. He knows if his father were to know this, then he would be so disappointed and angry with him. He never planned of falling in love with a beautiful, wonderful, feisty redhead woman. He chuckled quietly to himself. Kushina was nothing like his own mother. She was more challenging and more difficult to get along with than his own mother, which was saying something. He laughed as he remembered how she would always scream about becoming Hokage and how she would call him names. Not once did he think that he would fall in love with her. He never thought that he would become Hokage or be a proud teacher to 3 incredible ninjas. Not once did he think that he would have a beautiful little girl in this village. He ran his hand through his hair and couldn't help but smile softly at the sight of the baby in his wife's arms. The baby turned her head, revealing beautiful blue eyes. Her sapphire eyes bored into his, causing him to gulp as his heart became heavy with the decision that he will soon has to make for his child. No matter how he looks at it, he will die tonight. Tears streamed down his eyes, and he thinks for the second time this night about the things he could never do. Never will he see Naruko grow up to become an independent girl. He will never get to hear her first words or see her first steps. Never question any guy she brings home or even see her off on the first day of school. All of these things were no longer possible for him. Kushina might still raise little Naruko-chan, but he wasn't so certain if it will happen or not. He could allow her to be raised by the village, but he wasn't so sure about going with this option. The main issue in his mind were the people of this village. There was very little chance of the people accepting his daughter, and they will mistreat her, if what his wife said was true. They will neglect her, and that was the last thing he wants to happen. He didn't want to die knowing that his daughter will never be happy, will never know what it is like to be loved. He doesn't want to see her get hurt. Sustaining the unbearable pain, Minato called his predecessor to do something for the sake of Naruko. He can't believe that he was going to let his old father take care of Naruko, but for her sake he will have to swallow his pride. He just hopes that his father wouldn't rub his bad habits on his daughter. The last thing he wants is a daughter that behaves just like her eccentric grandfather. My son and his wife are dead and my son wants me to raise my granddaughter. Makarov said as he stared at the tired old Hokage. Are you sure he wasn't joking with you? Yes, Makarov-san, I'm certain that your son wasn't joking with me, Hiruzen said. Minato told me before he went off to seal the Kyuubi that if anything were to happen to him or Kushina that you will be the one to raise her. He was very doubtful to do this, that I won't lie to you about, but he knew she is safer with you than here. Makarov saw the sincerity in the Hokage's face and he looked down at the little bundle in the Hokage's hands. He curled his hands into a fist and pondered over what the man in front of him said. Him raising a child, he would be horrible at raising a child, let alone a girl. Look at his own children. Yet, he can't deny that he just wants one more chance at doing this. A chance to prove that he wasn't a complete failure at being a parent. He nodded his head before staring closely at the baby. He found himself smiling at the sight of the locks of blonde hair. The little girl has Minato's hair, but does she have his eyes? If so, then he will have a female version of his son right in front of him. So will you raise Naruko-chan? I can't really deny my son's dying request, can I? Makarov asked, smiling at the man. But I will tell you this, she might never come to this village. I realize this, Hiruzen said, slumping in his seat. But it's for the best. If she stays here or even visits, I fear that they may harm her. Harm her, Makarov said, standing up in his seat. What do you mean harm her? She hasn't done anything to earn such hate. It isn't something she has done that caused their animosity, Hiruzen said, looking at the little bundle, who was scrunching up her nose. It's the point of her having the Kyuubi sealed inside of her. They judge her to be the demon itself and will try their hardest to make her life like a living hell. They may even murder her if they were given an opportunity. What? She's just a child, an innocent child that has no control of this. The older man yelled. Don't they have a mind? If they even think of injuring my grandchild, then you can bet your ass that I will bring harm to them. I see that Minato didn't inherit his personality from you. Makarov blinked his eyes before feeling tears rolling down his cheeks. He didn't bother to hide his tears from the Hokage. He just wanted all out, all the anguish and despair that he felt when his son didn't appear after a few weeks. All the pain and anger started to come out. He just couldn't stop questioning himself about this. Why him? Why did his son had to leave him and get himself slaughtered? Why didn't he tell them where he was? Did he despise him? There had been no clues, no hints of his son leaving them, of him planning to join this village. He told me that he's confident that you'll teach her, the teaching that you taught him. The Hokage spoke solemnly, snapping him out from his thoughts. In his eyes, you're the only reliable person that he can trust. He's certain that you will always be there for Naruko. Before he died, he was convinced that you will protect her with all your heart. If anyone dare harms anyone in my care, then you can be certain I will punish them. Makarov said, smiling down in the child in his arms. No one hurts my children or grandchildren and gets away with it. Hiruzen nodded grimily at the warning and looked down at the blonde-haired girl. This may be the last time he would see this girl, but it will be better this way. This decision will be able to spare a child from a world of hate and pain. 6 years later. Mongolia town. It's been 6 years since Makarov had taken in Naruko, and not a day passed, where he wasn't shocked of just how much the girl reminded him of her father. Not only in appearance but, in personality as well. She had her father's brains and his rational thinking, and for that he was very grateful for. He doesn't know how he could bear it if his granddaughter was like the rest of the guild. Reckless and troublemaking were not traits that he wished on his 2 grandchildren. He shook his head and gazed at his grandchild, musing about how at the same time his sweet granddaughter wasn't like her father. She was just more reckless than him, getting into fights in school whenever someone insulted the guild. If it had been Minato, he would have kept quiet and calmly dealt with it. No, not Naruko. She just went in there and beat the utter crap out of those kids. This was the main reason why he hadn't started her training in magic, but this will all change today. He couldn't deny her of her this part of her heritage, and her big blue eyes didn't change his mind. Not in any way or form. The tearful eyes didn't change his mind, not one bit did that change his mind. Oh, who was he kidding? He can't deny his granddaughter of this chance. Gramps, where are we going? We're not going our usual route to the guild, Naruko said, tilting her head at her grandfather. That's because we aren't going to the guild. Makarov smiled at his 6-year-old granddaughter. He can practically picture his granddaughter's reaction when he tells her about the training he plans for her. She will be crying with tears of joy and will tell him he is the best grandfather in the world. But, don't you have work to do? Naruko furrowed her eyebrows at her smiling grandfather. You never miss a day of work. It's okay to take a day off, once in a while. Besides, it isn't like our guild will be destroyed if I'm not there. Gramps, have you met our guild? They will destroy the guild even if you're there, Naruko said incredulously. She groaned as her grandfather shrugged his shoulders at her. She felt like pulling her hair or throwing a chair at her eccentric grandfather. Didn't he know how reckless their guild is? Doesn't he always complain about the damages their guild causes? She sighed. She really doesn't understand her Gramps. You should stop worrying about the guild, Naruko. Makarov said. It can survive a day without me. No, it can't, Naruko muttered under her breath. It can't even endure an hour without you. The old man chuckled nervously at his granddaughter's words and tugged on his granddaughter's hands as he led her towards the forest. The blonde giggled at the sight of so many animals in one place, trying to remember the names of the animals her schoolteacher taught her. That was a rabbit. And that was a fox, wasn't it? She inched closer to the animals but stopped when her grandfather gave her a warning look. He suddenly stopped, causing the sapphire-eyed girl to stop. She tilted her head in curiosity and watched as her lovely grandfather gestured for her to sit down on the ground. She frowned but did as her grandfather wished, wondering what he was planning for her. He wasn't going to do anything crazy. No, that's her Uncle Ivan, not her loving grandfather. Definitely not her affectionate, goofy grandfather. Naruko, do you know what magic is? The blonde blinked and nodded. Of course I know what magic is. Only an idiot doesn't know what magic is. Naruko, mind explaining to me what magic is? Makarov asked, rolling his eyes at his granddaughter's rudeness. All right, Gramps. From what you told me, magic is stored within a separate system within that is the physical embodiment of the spirit. When the physical spirit of an organism connects with the spiritual flow of nature, the spirit forms magic as a product of the connection. Only 10% of the world's population is able to use magic, which is noted to keep a balance between ordinary people and those with magic. It takes an enormous amount of concentration and mental ability to use magic. Naruko recited, frowning at her grandfather. Why are you asking me to tell you this? You already know this. Because I'm going to teach you magic, today. Her grandfather explained. Naruko beamed at this and the old man smiled at her, before ruffling her hair. Her smile widens and for a brief moment, Makarov can see his young son smiling at him. He shook his head and smiled as his granddaughter, who was grinning and whooping at his words. However, I'm going to get you to access your magic. Makarov said. What? That's no fun. Laxus even have to do this. The blonde arched her eyebrows and stated dryly. I'm a hell lot smarter than Laxus. You're 6, Naruko. You're not the same age as Laxus. Who has to help him when it comes to his math homework? You and Uncle Ivan, Naruko retorted. Even he knows that I'm smarter than him at some subjects. You're only smarter than Laxus when it comes to math, not when it comes to other subjects. Makarov shook his head at Naruko. Your cousin had unfortunately inherited my horrible math skills. Gramps, you aren't that bad in math. It took me 3 weeks to see that the guild spent too much money on beer and all because I miscalculated the cost. Makarov muttered. If Minato was here, he would have been able to make sure that I wouldn't have done such a stupid mistake. Naruko kept quiet and stared at the luscious green trees before asking. What's my dad like, Gramps? Am I anything like him or am I like my mother? The old man smiled. Your father was in many ways just like you. Makarov chuckled. He was just as good as math as you and was exceptionally bright especially when it came to magic. Mastered his spells at the age of 8 but he was just so humble about it. He smiled sadly. He was never the type of kid who would brag about his achievement. San was completely different from Uncle Ivan. If it were Uncle Ivan then he would have bragged about it. Yes, Ivan would have done that. Makarov agreed. Your father just simply got most of his personality from your Gramps, thank heavens for that. The blonde giggled at her grandfather's word before going back to the topic at hand. So Gramps, how do I access my magic? First of all, Naru-chan, take a seat. Naruko blinked her eyes and obeyed her grandfather's order, taking a seat on the dirt-filled ground. She gazed up, finding her grandfather staring hardly at her, but she wasn't fazed one bit. Now what do I do, Gramps? Breathe slowly and clear your mind of your thoughts, Naru-chan. Naruko closed her eyes and exhaled. Makarov nodded his head in satisfaction as the blue-eyed girl repeated the actions before speaking. Now, Naru-chan, finding your magic might take a little while. Makarov sighed. It may take weeks before you can access it, so keep doing this until you can find it. It certainly took your two-san a while before he accomplished it. I bet you I can do it by today, she said, staring determinedly at her grandfather. I'm not like my father. Whatever my father can do, I can do it 10 times better. The old man quirked his lips into a small gentle smile, causing the blonde to cross her arms at him. He shook his head at her, ruffling her straight blonde hair. She laughed, clasping her hands in delight before glaring at her grandfather. I'm going to do it, Gramps. I'm going to be a hell lot stronger than my own two-san. Naruko declared. I believe you, Naru-chan. The blonde nodded her head in satisfaction at his words before concentrating deeply on the action of drawing out any magic power she could find. Sweat started to form on her face as her search for her magic began. She furrowed her eyebrows as she searched for something, anything that would feel different from inside of her body. Nothing, not even a funny feeling. Maybe she was doing something wrong. Was it possible that she shouldn't try to find it? Perhaps she needs to envision it. She focused on her physical spirit, imagining it to be a huge ball of thread in her mind's eyes. She imagined herself picking a thread that was her spirit and allowed it to go through the needle. Naruko felt herself being flooded with magic power. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. She could feel it flowing to her hands, to her whole body. She didn't notice that the wind started to swirl around her. I did it, Gramps. Naruko cried out, beaming at her gaping Gramps. I think I found my magic. Her grandfather blinked his eyes and muttered. Found it. I think you basically found the perfect magic for you. The blonde blinked, frowning at her grandfather and asked. What do you mean, Gramps? Did you notice what happened to you, just now? She shook her head, scrunching her nose at him. He grimaced and rubbed his chin, before ordering her to gather her magic. She nodded her head eagerly and did as he asked, concentrating with all of her heart to find it again. The old man's eyes widened when he saw that the wind was again swirling around her, gulping when he saw that the winds around her were coming more fierce. This was strange. Not once in his long life has he seen a kid finding their magic this fast or find their affinity this quickly. Not even Minato found his affinity in magic this fast. Her father only found it after a couple of weeks when he found his magic. Not only this, he could feel just how much magic she has. And by Kami, it was great. He stared at his beaming granddaughter and sighed. His granddaughter may just become one of the strongest mages in this whole world, if trained properly. So Gramps, since I found my magic, what are we going to do, now? His granddaughter asked. He blinked and shook his head before answering. I'm going to train you in your affinity, Naru-chan. Affinity. Many mages have natural affinities for their own magic style. He explained. Just now, you called upon your natural affinity, which appears to be wind magic. Sweet, she yelled. Wind magic. I always wanted magic associated with the elements. So Gramps, what are you going to teach me now? Are you going to teach me some cool moves or what? Makarov gave her a sharp look, causing her to chuckle in embarrassment. He flexed his wiry arms, staring thoughtfully at his cheerful granddaughter. Excitement was shining through her eyes and childlike curiosity glinted in her eyes. Her innocence disguises the potential of the strong mage. As a fellow mage, Makarov learnt from experience that the faster you can find your magic, the more potential they have. His granddaughter was no different. Naruko, I'll start teaching you your affinity next week when I see that you can access it without any struggle. He said firmly, causing the girl to pout. This means for the whole week, you're only going to mediate, all right? Hi, Gramps. Next thing you need to know, Naru-chan, is that I'm not going to be easy on you. If anything, I'm going to be tough on you. He warned the blue-eyed girl. When I'm training you, I'm not your grandfather. I'm not the guild master. I'm your teacher, understand? Yes, gee. He gave her a warning look. Yes, sensei, Naruko said, nodding her head at him. Good, her grandfather said curtly. Next thing you need to know is that this training won't be easy. This won't be like school. There will be times when you will get bruised. Are you ready for that? Of course I am, she yelled. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you tell me earlier? I have my reasons, Naruko. He said firmly. Your training may take months, maybe years, because what I'm about to teach you is something that not many people can do. The blonde smiled and said, Thank you, Gramps. Sorry Gramps, I forgot to call you sensei. Makarov gulped as a full blast of memories of his son saying the same thing to him hit him. The pain in his heart tightened, but he ignored it, staring full-heartedly at his smiling granddaughter. He will train her and Laxus to be better and wiser than their own fathers. Maybe then, history won't repeat and he won't lose his last members of his family. And where have you been, Naru-chan? Makarov sighed when Naruko smiled in embarrassment as he gave her a disapproving look. He tapped his feet impatiently, waiting to hear her explanation. This was the second time this week his granddaughter had left home early. He knew without a doubt from the guilty look in her eyes that she did something wrong. I was with Laxus Ni-san, Naruko admitted, not elaborating about what she was doing with her cousin at 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh, and what were the two of you doing? Naturally curious, Makarov studied her closely before frowning. The blonde knew without doubt he was worried and curious. Laxus wasn't an early riser like her or their Gramps, and to hear her cousin had gotten up early must make him wonder what they had planned. It's a secret, she beamed at him. I promise Laxus Ni-san that I won't tell you what it is. Oh, can't you give your beloved grandfather a hint on what the secret is? Makarov pouted. Gramps, it wouldn't be much a secret if I tell you. Naruko giggled at her grandfather's pouting face. Telling him what she and Laxus would ruin the whole thing. He will know in a couple of weeks. And then he will be so happy with them. She focused on her grandfather. Something was different about him. Looking closer, she noticed the change of clothing. He wasn't wearing any of those strange hats he usually loves to wear. This was weird. Gramps, what happened? Why are you wearing the color black? She bunched her skirt nervously. You dislike wearing the color black. Makarov sighed, clearly pained that Naruko has noticed this, but he answers after Naruko maintained an expectant look on her face. I'm going to the cemetery, Naru-chan. You see, it's your Gram's anniversary today. Naruko's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Grams, I didn't know that today was the anniversary. And today of all days, she frowned. I guess this means that I shouldn't leave you alone, Gramps. I'm coming with you to see her. Makarov almost frowned but retains a smile on his face, but somehow still conveyed his sadness. One day, Naruko would like it if her grandfather just could be open with her. You won't mind if I come with you? Naruko can't stop herself from looking at him with her wide eyes. Because I really want to see Gram's grave. I've so much to say to her. The old man gave her a sad look that made her heart clenched in sadness. Not once in her short life had she ever seen her grandfather look so sad, so heartbroken. Naruko didn't like this side of her grandfather. She looked at the old man again. For as long as she could remember, her grandfather had always raised her. Her earliest memories of him teaching her how to eat with a fork while her cousin looked at them in bemusement. Even then, he was happy. He was always so joyful, there wasn't one day has she ever seen him unhappy. She shifted in her spot, watching as her grandfather's eyes shifted towards the picture frame in the window stand. No doubt looking at the picture of him with his sons and wife. She knows without a doubt that he's remembering the past, remembering the times before the death of her grandmother and her father. You should change your clothes, Naru-chan. Her grandfather commented lightly. It isn't proper to go to the cemetery without wearing your best clothes. Naruko's eyes widened and she glanced down at her clothes. The orange dress she wore was her favorite. It was a present from him when she had become the first in the class, and he wants her to change her clothes. No, she didn't want to change it to another dress. The only other dress she has was the frilly pink dress that his friend had given her for her birthday. The dress he gave her was atrocious with its frill, and now he wants her to wear it. Can't I wear pants, or borrow a dress from one of my friends from school? She pleaded. I don't want to wear the dress that Bob Oji-san gave me. It's the only dress that's appropriate, Naru-chan, and it isn't that bad. He commented lightly. You look very adorable in the dress. But it has so much frills. She cried out. And it itches. And I look like a complete weirdo. The old man laughed out aloud at her words, causing Naruko to stomp her feet at him. It wasn't funny. The dress was just so uncomfortable and was a bright pink neon dress, where everyone stared at her. It almost made her feel like some kind of doll. If it wasn't a present from her grandfather's friend, then she would have ripped the dress into tiny pieces. You don't look like a weirdo, Naru-chan. Her grandfather spoke up and Naruko nearly rolled her eyes at him. It was an obligation for him to say this for her, just like it was an obligation for Laxus to keep an eye on her. If anything, you look even cuter when you wear that dress. She stared at him. Of course, he will say she looked even cuter when she wore the dress because she was his granddaughter. If he hadn't say something like this to her, then it'll be bizarre. Her grandfather always liked to compliment her. He, along with the other members of the guild, liked to say she was one of the cutest girls in the whole town. A load of crap. She wasn't the prettiest or the cutest girl in this town. One of the prettiest girls in the town was in her class, having the attention of the teachers and all of the students. Compared to that girl, she was just plain old boring. Of course, she'll never say this to them. And you only have to wear the dress until we leave the cemetery, Naru-chan. He said, not noticing she had spaced out. It won't hurt you if you wear the dress, Naruko. The blonde looked down at her feet. Wearing the dress was just so embarrassing. Why couldn't he understand it? Besides, she dislikes wearing dresses and skirts. There was no way she could feel the wind in her hair or play in the dirt-filled ground without fear of ruining the dress. This goes with all dresses and skirts, but her grandfather was unfortunately right. Wearing a dress won't hurt, but she won't wear it. Not even if. I'll buy you a lot of ramen when we go to the guild. Her grandfather said, and we can get some ice cream on our way out of the cemetery. Naruko smiled. Can I get chocolate ice cream? And can I get vanilla ice cream? Only one of them, Naru-chan. Her grandfather chuckled. You know that eating too much ice cream isn't good for you. Please, Gramps. She gave him the puppy dog look. This will no doubt work and she will get her favorite 2 ice creams. He just can't resist this expression. No one could. Neither him nor the other members of the guild can resist her. Not even Laxus can deny her, and he was pretty stingy when it comes to money and food. Oh, alright, but only those 2 flavors. You're the best grandfather in the whole wide world, she declared, launching herself to her grandfather. He winced as Naruko gave him a tight hug and gently pushed the girl off him. She grinned at him, feeling happy when her grandfather gave her a small smile back. When her grandfather gave her a smile like that, Naruko wished that he could always stay like that. Naruko held her grandfather's hand as they walked towards the grave where her grandmother was buried in. She knew even before going to the cemetery that smiling wasn't something nice to do, but she finds it hard to do so. Keeping a small frown, she held her grandfather's hand tightly and looked around the cemetery with curiosity. She could see so many people with tears rolling down their faces and hear the anguish cries from some of them. She twisted her head to look at her grandfather, hanging her shoulders when she saw the sorrow in his eyes. You know your grandmother always loved to hear people laugh, he said out loud, stopping in front of one of the graves. He stared at the grave with a forced smile and looked ready to cry his heart out. Naruko raised her eyebrows and flickered her head wildly at the grave in front of her. It looked so worn down, with bits of the gravestone tumbling down and dust covered the inscription. Kneeling down, the blue-eyed girl started to wipe the dust off the gravestone and began reading the inscription. Her life is a beautiful memory. Her absence is a silent grief. Katsumi Drayar, sadly missed and never forgotten. X698X760. What was she like, Gramps? She asked softly. Makarov licked his dry lips. She was a very gentle woman, always stopping to watch the flowers and never raised her voice one bit. He sighed wistfully. She was intelligent, having been one of the most smartest people I knew. And she was the prettiest girl with her big blue eyes in my eyes at least. Many guys wanted her and she could have any guy she wanted. But she chose me, the short guy. Asking her out was the best day of my life. Naruko could feel a lump being formed when she saw that tears were streaming down her grandfather's face. Gramps, if you don't want to talk about it then. She loved it whenever people laugh and always wanted to make people happy even at the cost of her own happiness. She was also very caring when it came to your father and uncle. He continued on, gazing at the headstone in front of her. Always scolding me for spending too much time in the guild. Gramps, she always warned me that spending too much time in the guild and not enough time at home will tear our family apart. His voice broke at this and Naruko stared at him with worry. He shook his head. She was right, of course. She's gone as well as Minato. I'm sorry, Gramps. Naruko finally spoke out. I didn't mean to bring up any painful memories for you. You shouldn't be sorry, Naru-chan. He said, ruffling her hair. It's only natural you would ask about your Grams. But I made you feel so sad. She cried. I don't want you to be sad. I want to see you smile. If Grams was here I'm sure she would have wanted you to smile. The old man ruffled her hair and nodded his head, giving her a small smile before saying softly to the teary-eyed girl. Naru-chan, you should stop crying. He said gently, smiling at her. If you keep being sad and keep crying then you will end up looking at me. Naruko hiccuped at his words, giggling as she tried to imagine herself looking like her grandfather and giggled even harder as the image popped in her mind. Her Gramps always knew what to say and what to do to cheer her up, from funny faces to the strangest stories. She turned around and faced the gravestone, clapping her hands together and said to the gravestone. I'm Naruko Uzumaki and I'm 6 years old. If you didn't know, I'm your granddaughter and I'll turn 7 years old next year. And I wish you'll be there to watch me on my birthday. She paused and continued. Gramps misses you and I miss you too. From what Gramps tells me, you're the one that talks some sense to him when he does something stupid. Her grandfather frowned. But he doesn't do that much. And if you're worried about him not taking good care of his family then you shouldn't worry. He takes real good care of us. Especially me. He always takes care of me when I get sick and always gives me sweets. He's the best grandfather in the whole wide world. Naruko nodded in satisfaction and twisted her head to look at her grandfather. Makarov was crying at her words, and tugged her arms, giving her a big hug. She blinked her eyes and relaxed her whole body before returning his hug. He pulled away from her and said, You're definitely the best granddaughter in the whole world, Naru-chan. Nothing can compare to you. I'm your only granddaughter. She beamed at him. Of course you think I'm the best granddaughter in the whole world. That may be true but you're definitely a good granddaughter, Naru-chan. He said affectionately. And I want you to know that I love you and Laxus with all my heart, despite being strict, she suggested helpfully. Yes, strict, her grandfather agreed. Even if I yell at you, it doesn't mean I don't love you, remember that. Please don't forget that because I don't want you and Laxus to think that I don't love the two of you. Naruko bit her lips and curled her hands into a small fist. Why does he keep telling her this? She knows he loves them. It was plain as day to her. He always gives them presents, helps them with their homework and always fusses over them whenever they get hurt. Sure, sometimes he gives them a sharp lashing with his tongue but they knew he loved them. He will never abandon them and will always protect them. The same can be said for the guild and because of that. I'll protect him and the guild. She says it like a promise, an oath, and a vow. She will keep it. Die trying isn't even an option. They left when they saw that it was time for them to go see the guild. If they stayed any longer then the guild would be destroyed. The last thing they wanted was to see the guild destroyed. 2 hours later after they left the cemetery, Naruko finally entered the guild. She took a deep breath, wrinkling her nose at the smell of the alcohol that covered the area and grinning as she heard the guild members greeting them. She gave them a big wave, greeting them back before beginning her search for her cousin. He wasn't with any of the kids that were his age, and he definitely wasn't in the bar. Where's he? Has he gone on a mission and didn't tell her? She pouted. He knows she doesn't like it when he does that. Looking for me, Naru-chan. A familiar voice said. Naruko turned around, grinning at the sight of her smiling cousin standing behind her. Immediately, she launched herself to her blonde-haired cousin, laughing delightfully as he twirled her around the hall. It wasn't long before he gently putting down to the ground. Why are you wearing the dress that Gramps' friend gave you? The boy led her towards the bar, helping her sit in the stool. He had a bright smile on his face. I thought you declared to me and Kana that you will never wear the dress unless your life depended on it. Naruko didn't know whether to smile sheepishly or to glare at him for reminding her of her oath, but gave him a pout instead. Well, Gramps made me. She twisted a strand of her sun-kissed blonde hair, avoiding looking at her frowning cousin. He told me he was going to the cemetery to see Graham's grave, and well, I couldn't wear the dress I wore this morning because he thought that it wasn't appropriate enough. And he thought the frilly dress was appropriate, did he? He asked incredulously, looking put off at her words. It was the only dress I own beside the orange dress he gave me, so I had no choice but to wear this dress. She glared at him as he laughed out loud at her words. It's not funny, Laxus ni-san. I hate wearing dresses, especially wearing dresses like this. It makes me feel like I'm some kind of doll. You're overreacting, Naru-chan. He waved her protest off. You look very pretty in the dress, it makes you look very feminine. Are you saying I'm not feminine? Yes, her cousin deadpanned. Naru-chan, let's face it, you can't act feminine. She gritted her teeth at her cousin and stomped her feet on the ground, causing a rumble to the guild's building. Why does he always says that to her? Just because she doesn't do what most girls like to do, doesn't mean she can't be feminine. She just thought it was pretty much pointless when it comes to their occupation. Anyways, what else did you do with Gramps besides visiting Graham's grave? He cocked his head at her. Knowing you, you must have asked Gramps for something. Well, I did ask him if we could go get some ice cream from the ice cream parlor. She grinned. Their chocolate ice cream was the best yet. You say that every time, Naruko. I'm not kidding, their ice cream was even better today. She licked her lips. It tasted even better than the ramen Amiko-chan makes. What tastes even better than the ramen Amiko-san makes? A voice called out. Naruko twirled around her seat, grinning when she saw a pretty brown-haired girl standing in front of them. Kana-chan. Naruko cried out, launching herself to give her best friend a hug. I missed you. It feels like forever since I seen you. Naru-chan, I saw you yesterday. Kana said, struggling to escape from her best friend's bone-crushing hug. And you're killing me. Naruko immediately stopped the hug, smiling apologetically as the brown-haired girl struggled to get her breath. Holding back her strength had never been her strong point, as her grandfather would always point out to her. Now, tell me, what's this about you saying that it tastes even better than Amiko's ramen? Kana took a seat beside Naruko while Laxus rolled his eyes. It must be something for you to say that. The chocolate ice cream from the new ice cream parlor tastes even better than ramen. Kana raised her eyebrows at her in disbelief. Naruko simply scowled at her friend's response, tapping her fingers on the table. I'm not lying. Their ice cream was so good that it nearly made me cry tears of joys. Naru-chan, I've been to that ice cream parlor and their ice cream isn't even that good. Laxus declared. I doubt you actually cried tears of joy from eating their ice cream. If it was ramen, I would believe, but ice cream. You just don't understand why ice cream is so tasty. You don't have my love for ice cream or food, she said angrily. Besides, I eat more food than you, so that means I know what I'm talking about. How does that prove anything? You practically eat anything, and if you know what's good for you, then you'll stop eating too much. Besides, I don't need to have your stomach to know if the food is good or not. Laxus said. He's right, Naru-chan. The blonde pouted at her best friend. Whose side are you on? She cried. My mean cousin or me? Naruko. I'm not mean. Yes, you're. Naruko crossed her arms at her cousin. You told me that I can't act feminine and basically implied that I'm going to become fat. I didn't mean it like that. Laxus cried. Oh, what do you mean then, Laxus? I mean, Naruko scowled at her cousin, who looked at lost on how to explain to her what he meant. This was so like her cousin to insult her and then tell her that he didn't mean what he said. If he didn't mean what he said, then why not be more polite about it? If he didn't insult her lack of girlishness and large appetite then, it's how she always seemed to get into trouble with the other girls. If this keeps up, then he will never find a girlfriend like their grandfather always tease him. It's just that I don't want you to be teased by the other kids in the school because of your huge appetite. Laxus finally explained. I don't care about what they say, she retorted. Isn't that true, Kana? I'm not getting involved with your argument. Kana jumped off from her seat and turned to the direction of where Mikao and Wakaba were sitting. The two men appeared to have an interesting conversation. This is between family and nothing to do with me. But I need someone to take my side. Naruko called to Kana, who was now walking towards Mikao and Wakaba. Please come back. Don't leave me with this meanie. The brown-haired girl ignored her, causing the blonde to sigh at her best friend. She turned to look at her cousin, who was arching his eyebrows at her. The blonde scowled at him before turning her head away from him. This caused Laxus to side at her. I don't want the other kids to bully you because of how much you eat. Laxus repeated, looking at the mission board as he said this. I just don't want you to come to Gramps with tears in your eyes because the kids are being quite mean to you. Naruko arched her eyebrows and said, I can handle whatever they say, Laxus. And if they do then I will give them a tongue lashing like I always do. If that doesn't work then you would punch them in the face, causing Gramps to be called by your school. Laxus stated dryly, I rather like the fact you keep punching them in the face but, Gramps doesn't as you know from the number of times he scolded you about that. It isn't my fault they don't know how to keep their mouths shut. He raised his eyebrows at her in amusement. And sometimes, they just need a good beating, you know. I know I shouldn't punch them but they deserve it. I'm not arguing with you, Naru-chan. Well, you're telling me not to fight them. She pointed out. Besides, it isn't like I use my magic to beat them. I just punch them in the face. Naru-chan, do you know how hard your punch can be? It's pretty much a guarantee if someone gets punched by you that they have to go to the hospital. Naruko blushed in embarrassment. And if you had used magic on them then Gramps will be disappointed with you. Naruko looked down at her feet and clenched her hands into a small fist. The last thing she wanted was her grandfather to be disappointed with her. It just pains her when he gives her the look that said, I expected better from you, or when he tells her that she should have known better. If he was disappointed in her then she doesn't know how to react. She looked up when her cousin ruffled her hair. He had a huge grin on his face, causing her to give him a small smile as well. You shouldn't worry about Gramps being disappointed in you, he's quite proud of you. She smiled wider at his words. He always brags to Dad about how you have more potential than Minato Ojasan. Really, he never mentioned that to me. That's because he's worried that you might get a big head. Naruko smirked and said, like you. Yes, like me. Wait a second, I don't have a big head, Naruko. Laxus yelled, glaring at his smirking cousin. The blonde tilted her head and innocently said, but you always say that you're able to defeat more than 20 bandits, when in actual fact you can only defeat 10 or 15. Laxus's eyebrows twitched at her words, causing the blue-eyed girl to giggle at him. You know that I can defeat more than 15 bandits. The blonde laughed. You don't believe me, Naruko. I'll show it to you when school's out. So you mean in 6 months then? When you had enough time to make your magic stronger. She stated dryly. Yeah, that's a good way of proving it to me. Her cousin glared at her and muttered something about smartass cousin, causing Naruko to sigh at her cousin. She loved her annoying older cousin with all her heart but he can be quite rude at times. If people thought she was rude then they should meet Laxus. He takes being impolite to a whole new level. Even if I can't prove it to you now, Naru-chan, I can definitely beat some of the guys in our guild. Laxus rubbed his chin. Through some of our guild members are quite weak as Toussaint will say. I think that's why the kids in our school look down on it. No, that isn't the reason why kids in school look down on it. She whispered quietly, turning around in her seat to observe the rest of the guild. She smiled when she hears the laughter from the guild before frowning. She loves fairy tale. She loves how heartwarming it was and the friendliness in the guild and she wishes that her classmates could see the good in it but they can't. Why else will they look down on our guild? Laxus arched his eyebrows. The blonde shrugged her shoulders. I don't know about the kids in your year, but the kids in my year dislikes it because their parents called it a place for useless drunks, who can't hold a job. She replied bitterly. And they praise those stupid jerks in the military because they can hold a job. Laxus scowled and muttered, if that's why you keep punching those kids, then I don't blame you. That isn't why I keep punching them in the face. Her tone turned cold. I can handle that because I can always point out that the people in our guild are able to do things that the military will never consider doing. I punch them because, she trailed off. You punch them because what? I'm not telling you, Naruko whispered, hunching her shoulders. I would rather forget about the reason why I keep getting into fights. You know you can always tell me, he said. I'm always going to be there for you. I know, Naruko said, smiling at him. I know that I can count on you. In fact, I can always count on the guild and you to be always there for me. The blonde left her cousin when she hears her grandfather shouting her name to come and see him in his office. What her grandfather wants from her is a complete mystery, but ignoring her grandfather is disrespectful and she doesn't like disrespecting him. Makarov smiled when he saw Naruko standing in front of him. His granddaughter looked at him with nervousness and curiosity, before shifting her eyes towards the pictures of the previous guild masters of fairy tale. A barrage of memories suddenly flashed through his mind, reminding him of what his life was once like. Chu-san, I'm going to become a guild master just like you. He winced and shook his head, reminding himself that this wasn't the time to remember about his son. You called for me, Gramps, Naruko said hesitantly, shifting her gaze from him to the pile of books that surrounded the shelves behind him. Take a seat, Naruko. The blonde pursed her lips and did as he said, taking a seat in front of him. He handed her some sweets and the blue-eyed girl beamed at him. She took the sweets and popped it into her mouth, licking her lips as she did so. Why did you call me, here Gramps? She asked. You rarely call me into your office. So what's the occasion? Are you going to another meeting? Yes, I'm going to another meeting with the other guild masters. Makarov sighed. And when things are just back to normal too. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. You always give me a warning beforehand. Why are you telling me this now? Where am I going to stay while you're away? It's quite sudden. I just got a letter a couple of minutes ago. Makarov said calmly, staring at his fidgeting granddaughter. And you're going to stay with Laxus and Ivan while I'm gone. Naruko turned pale at his announcement and said, can't I stay with someone else? Like Mikao or Wakaba, I don't want to stay with Ivan Ojasan. Why not? He's your uncle and he's quite capable of taking care of you. Makarov said calmly, and the last time I left you with them, they were able to somehow to lose you. Then why don't I stay with Kana-chan? She won't be able to lose me and I'll be real good Gramps. Naruko bunched her dress up. Please don't leave me with Ivan Ojasan. What's wrong with staying with your uncle? Naruko avoided his gaze, seemingly interested in the portraits surrounding the small room. Makarov frowned. Why was his granddaughter behaving so strangely? She doesn't usually act in this way. She was always smiling and joking, but not this time. It seems like there was something she was hiding from him. Can you tell me why you don't want to stay with Ivan? Makarov asked quietly. You know you can tell me anything, kiddo. Naruko stared at him, curling her lips at him and opened her mouth to say something before closing it again. She took several breaths. Makarov looked at his youngest grandchild with worry and concern. What did Ivan do to make her act this way? Whenever I'm alone with Ivan Ojasan, he would tell me that it's my fault Chu-san died. He constantly says if I hadn't been born then, Chu-san will be alive. Tears were streaming down her eyes. It isn't my fault he died, right? I mean, how is it my fault? He died during a mission, didn't he? I wasn't there when he and Ka-san took the mission. How the hell is my fault that he died? If anyone dare harms anyone in my care, then you can be certain I will punish them. Those had been his words to his son's predecessor when he told him that his son had believed that he could protect his granddaughter. And he would protect her. But he never thought that he would have to protect her from her own family. He gritted his teeth. Ivan was taking it too far by blaming Naruko for Minato and his wife's death. However, he does need to tell Naruko a little bit about the truth, but not today. Definitely not today. It isn't your fault that they died, he said, looking at her in the eyes. The blonde blinked her eyes at him and he continued. They died doing what their job asked them to do. What was the job? Naruko asked, rubbing her eyes until it was dry from her tears. Makarov sighed and answered, I'll tell you when you're older, Naru-chan. The blue-eyed girl nodded her head, giving him a small smile before asking quietly. Can I please stay with Kana-chan while you're away? Makarov sighed and reluctantly nodded his head at her. Naruko smiled and whooped at his words, declaring him to be the best grandfather in the world before running downstairs to tell her best friend that she's staying with her. He smiled softly before staring down at the picture of his 2 sons and wife smiling at him. What the hell was wrong with his family? He and his wife weren't able to figure out where their son was, which was saying something. His eldest son had gone insane, blaming his niece for the loss of his brother. The only 2 sane people in this family were Laxus and Naruko, both of them appearing to have nothing wrong with them. He sighed and rubbed his beard, staring carefully at the picture of his deceased wife. I don't know where Ivan get his craziness from. He muttered. Was it from your side of the family? Because none of my relatives acted in this way. He glanced at the report in his hands and sighed. He needed to keep an eye on Ivan and keep him away from Naruko as well. The old man stared at the mug filled with beer before taking a huge gulp from it. He was getting too old for this job. Maybe it's time that he starts searching for someone to take over the guild. Gramps, why's Laxus here? And where's Ivan Ojasan? Naruko stared at her grandfather with wide eyes before flickering her eyes towards her cousin, who stared angrily at her grandfather. She frowned at him, receiving an angry glare from her cousin. Her frown deepened. What happened? Why's her cousin so angry with her grandfather? And why isn't her uncle with them? Grimacing, Makarov kneeled down until he was at her eye level. I'm sorry to tell you this, but Ivan is no longer a part of the guild. Naruko blinked her eyes at her grandfather before furrowing her eyebrows. She tilted her head at him and asked, What do you mean? Did something happen to him? Gramps kicked Tu-san out of the guild. That's the reason. Laxus scowled. He kicked Tu-san out of the guild for no fucking reason. I had a reason, Laxus. Makarov rose from his kneeling position and stared at the preteen boy. Well, what was it? Why would you do that to your own family? Tell me the damn reason. Laxus yelled. Why would you kick Tu-san out? Tell me. You're not old enough to know. Makarov said calmly. All you need to know is that Ivan did something that put the guild in danger. Laxus glared at their grandfather, before stomping upstairs to his room. Sighing, Makarov shook his head and took a seat on the couch while Naruko stared sadly at where her cousin had once stood. Not once had she seen Laxus looked so mad before, so heartbroken. She couldn't contemplate what her cousin was going through. She took a seat on the couch and stared at the picture of her smiling father, uncle and grandfather. The love between all of them radiated like the sun, blinding and scorching her, but now that was all gone. The love between her uncle and grandfather had faded and all she could think that it was her fault. If she didn't tell her grandfather what her uncle told her, would her uncle still be here? If she hadn't told her grandfather about what her uncle told her, then he would be here. If she hadn't told her grandfather, then her cousin wouldn't be so angry with their grandfather. He would be smiling and be more like himself, than yelling at their grandfather. This is all her fault. It's my fault that you kicked Ivan Ojasan out, right? It isn't your fault, Naru-chan. She shook her head at her grandfather. Ivan did something that put the guild in harm's way and I had to kick him out to protect the guild. If it isn't my fault, then what did he do to make you do such a thing? He would never harm someone. She shifted her gaze towards the pictures. He says a lot of bad things, but he will never harm someone. Right, he wouldn't harm anyone in the guild. Naru-chan, I know Ivan Ojasan can be an asshole, but he will never hurt anyone in the guild. He cares for the guild in his own way. Naruko rested her head on her arms. You had to have made a mistake, Gramps. You have to bring him back. If not for my sake, then for Laxus' sake. Tu-san and Grams wouldn't have wanted you to do this. I'm not going to bring Ivan back. What he did was unforgivable. Her grandfather yelled. Neither you nor Laxus can change my mind. And that's final. The conviction in his eyes told her everything. Asking him later about bringing her uncle back would make him furious. Talking about her uncle will make him lose his temper. She doesn't want that. It will raise his blood pressure and then he will get ill. making her feel even more guilty for what happened between him and her uncle. She shook her head and started to make her way towards her bedroom, ignoring the sounds of her grandfather calling her. Nothing he says to her would make a difference to her, because in the end he won't bring back her uncle. It wouldn't change the fact that their family was now being torn apart from this sudden news. Naruko jumped onto her bed and looked at the wall, where the posters of her favorite mages and bands plastered over it. Why couldn't her life be like the life of those people? They probably didn't have that kind of trouble in their life. They might have never the problem of their families being torn apart of a reason unknown. These people have it lucky, compared to everyone else in the world. None of them had their whole world torn apart in just a couple of days. These celebrities didn't learn that their father was a shinobi, a murderer. They didn't learn that their father left the family to follow said occupation or that their grandfather had lied to them about where they actually come from. They also didn't learn that people were thinking that they would leave their own guild to become said killer. None of them had an uncle who despised them for being born. Not one of them had this problem. No one in the whole of Earthland had this damn problem. She gulped and closed her eyes to prevent the tears that were trying to come out of her eyes. Was it her fault that her uncle left the guild? Did she do something that made him go over the edge? Did he know that people were going to come after her and kill her because of her father? No, if he did know that, then he would rub it in her face. He would have said it so gleefully to her. Why does he hate me so much? What did I do to deserve such hate from him? Tears leaked out of her eye. If I hadn't been born, then maybe he would still be here with Gramps and Laxus. And then maybe Gramps wouldn't be so angry with him. Laxus wouldn't have yelled at Gramps. None of this would have happened if I had been born. She hated being a part of this family because she was the cause of all the trouble that was currently happening. Maybe it will be best if she doesn't tell her grandfather everything. Weeks passed since Makarov broke the news to his granddaughter about Laxus living with them and how he expelled his son from the guild. Since that day, neither of his grandchildren were talking to him, only speaking to him when necessary. The two of them weren't smiling as wide as they used to, giving fake smiles to everyone. He didn't want that from them. He wanted them to give their infectious smile, which never failed to make anyone smile. The smiles on their faces now were just a mockery to it. He hated that he was the cause of those fake smiles, but there was no way he would do as they asked and bring Ivan back. These two grandchildren of his were nothing like their own parents, and he didn't know whether he should be happy about that or not. On one hand, Minato and Ivan would have understand what he did at their age, while on the other hand, those two had done a lot of things to disappoint him. His grandchildren hadn't done anything to disappoint him. Gramps, will it be okay if I go to the forest? Makarov frowned at his smiling granddaughter. It's just that I want to train in my magic, and well, I can't do it in the guild or at home because of the space and damage I might cause. If it's the forest, well, I won't have to worry about you paying so much money because of the damage I made. I don't know, Naru-chan. Please, Gramps, I promise to be a good girl. I'll have Kana watch me if that makes you feel better. Naruko bit her lips. Please, Gramps, let me go to the forest. I can't train inside the guild or at home, and you know that. Let me go to the forest. I'll be a good girl and I won't cause any trouble. Just let me go to the forest to train. Makarov scratched his chin and looked at his blonde-haired granddaughter with a thoughtful look. On one hand, he didn't want to send his grandchild outside to the forest, where anything could happen to her. Those shinobi after his granddaughter might find her outside, and kill her because of the fact that her uncle leaked her location to them. The shinobi that he hired have killed all of the informants, but he couldn't take the chance of one of them surviving. Yet, he can't deny his granddaughter the chance to practice her magic. She was still a bubbling mage and was still trying to find her way in her magic. She still had a long way to go before becoming a very respected mage. She still needed to practice her spells as well as finding out who she really is as a mage. It doesn't help that she was a prodigy in wind magic, mastering spells that would take a kid her age years to master. It really doesn't help that Naruko loved magic with all of her heart. I'll watch you train, Makarov finally said, smiling at his young granddaughter. Naruko blinked and smiled at him, babbling about how he was the best grandfather in the world, and normally, her words makes him happy, but not this time. The wide smile on her face was her fake smile, and she rarely gave him such smiles, but after what he didn't blame her for giving him that smile. She was in pain but didn't want to show it to him, so she held it by giving him that fake smile. If he wasn't her grandfather then, he would have believed that things were back to normal, but he knows that it would be a long time before he sees a real smile on her face. Gramps, is it possible to make a new spell? Of course, it's possible, but it can be quite difficult to make new spells. Makarov frowned. Why do you ask? The blue-eyed girl scratched her forehead. Just curious, you know. Most of the spells I learn are from books, but books can take me so far. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. I want to do things that most mages can't do, and well. And you want to make your own spells? The blonde nodded her head and looked down at her hands before reverting her eyes towards the portraits that surrounded the room. I want to be able to do things that most mages can't do. I want to become the most powerful mage in the whole of Earthland, she admitted quietly. I want to be strong enough so that I would never have to go to you because of my troubles. Makarov opened his mouth to protest against his granddaughter's words but closed it when he saw the determination in his eyes. Memories of Minato rushed through his mind, causing him to clutch his chest in pain at the memories. You would think after a couple years, it would stop being painful for him to remember his son. He shook his head at his thoughts and followed his granddaughter to the forest, sighing when he saw that she was running even faster than usual. It feels like Naruko is even more active than when she was 2 years old, which was saying something. He can't count the number of times that he lost his cute little granddaughter in city and all because she couldn't sit still. She had even made him call the police because he couldn't find her anywhere in the city. Gramps, you're being a slowpoke, Naruko yelled, twisting her head to stare at him. I can't help it if you are becoming even faster than usual, Naruko. His granddaughter laughed loudly. It isn't funny, brat. You should take some pity on your grandfather here. If you can't handle me, then how can you handle the guild, Gramps? Naruko said, smiling innocently at him. After all, the members of the guild have more energy than me if you think about it. No, I think you have more energy when I think about it. He muttered under his breath as he tried his hardest to catch up with Naruko. He frowned when he noticed that his granddaughter had stopped running. His granddaughter was tilting her head and humming a small song, while having a small smile playing on her lips. She looked like she was on a world of her own, which he had no doubt she was. Is this where you want to do to practice your magic, Naru-chan? Naruko nodded. It feels peaceful here, and it is also the place where you first began to teach me magic, Gramps. She rubbed her hands together. And it doesn't help that I can cause so much damage here and nobody will care. You really want to cause some destruction, don't you, Naru-chan? His blonde-haired granddaughter grinned and nodded her head in enthusiasm at him before gesturing for him to move a couple of inches away from her. Shaking his head, he did as his granddaughter requested and took a seat on the tree furthest away from his granddaughter. He hoped that Naruko remembered his rule of not too much destruction in the forest. Knowing his granddaughter, she wouldn't forget his rule. Bam, bam. Makarov blinked his eyes at the sudden noise and looked up, gawking at the sight of the dozen of trees that was currently being destroyed. Why now, of all the times, to forget the rule, it has to be today. Today was Sunday, which means the mayor of the city will walk into the forest and will see a couple of dozen broken trees. Which means, he will know that it was his fault because only his guild would do something like this. Please, for his sake, that he doesn't have to pay too much money. He opened his mouth to tell his granddaughter to stop practicing her magic when he saw that she was furrowing her eyebrows as she put her palm forward against one of the trees. Her nose was crunch up like she always does when she is doing her homework. Can he really stop her from practicing her magic? She really was concentrating on it, and it seemed like she was practicing the one spell that she can't seem to get the hang of. Maybe it wouldn't hurt for her to practice a little bit longer. So he sit there and watch in amusement as Naruko tried to get her magic through her palm, each time smoke came out of her hand. After the 50th time, his granddaughter yelled out in frustration and stomped her foot on the ground. Why is this damn spell giving me so much trouble, huh? She kicked the rock, sending it a couple of feet away. I can do almost every spell in the textbook, even the hard ones, but when it comes to AC rank spell, then I'm stuck. Why? I mean, I could get a little bit of wind, but now, I'm not feeling anything. Why is it? Why is there no wind? What am I doing wrong? It might be because there is something bothering you, Naru-chan. His granddaughter furrowed her eyebrows at him. Sometimes magic responds to emotions, and so if you have too much emotions then it will dampen your magic. There's nothing that is affecting me. Naruko. Don't lie to me. She quivered at his harsh tone. I thought I taught you better than to lie to me. Fine. I am angry and sad with myself. She admitted, shuffling her feet together. It's my fault that Ivan Ojasan was kicked out of the guild. It's my fault that Laxus hates us. It's my fault to tell you that Ivan Ojasan had been saying horrible things to me. And I feel that if I had been any stronger then none of this would have happened, because maybe I could have stopped it. Tears were now streaming down her face. It also doesn't help that I learned that the man that I used to look up to had left our family for a stupid job and had now caused our family to be torn apart. And I feel even horrible knowing that I'm the daughter of a killer. I mean, what if it makes me a killer? And what if I do what Tu-san did and leave the guild because I was just so curious? What if? Naruko, listen to me. She stopped sniffing and stared at him with wide teary eyes. None of it is your fault. I didn't kick Ivan out of the guild because of you. He did something that will cause everyone in the guild to be in danger, and I had no choice but to kick him out. He wrapped his arms around his granddaughter. And listen to me, you're strong and you'll only get stronger, but your strength have nothing to do what happened. And your father didn't cause our family to be torn apart. If anything, he is the reason why I care about our family. And your father may have killed people, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a good person. But he killed somebody. What he did was wrong, but his job required him to kill. He whispered softly. I think he won't kill when his job doesn't require him to kill. And lastly, Naru, you won't become a killer because you aren't your father. You're your own person. Really? Yes, really. Naruko beamed. You've traits that neither your father or mother had. You've skills that both of your parents dreamed to have, and your personality doesn't come from them. They aren't. No, it is entirely your own personality. His granddaughter smiled hesitantly at his words and gave him a tight hug before going back to where he stood before. She breathed in and held her palm forward, causing Makarov to lean forward to see what is about to happen. A blue magic seal appeared and a huge gust of wind came out, destroying the rows of trees in front of her. Naruko scratched her head and turned around to give him an apologetic smile about the amount of damage that she made. Sighing, Makarov shook his head at her. It had been too much for him to hope that the young girl would learn not to cause too much damage. The only bright side of this is that his granddaughter had finally done the spell that she had trouble with. Through it will be a while before she mastered it, but knowing her, she liked the challenge. Now, only time can tell when his granddaughter would be able to master her final spell. Naruko peered over her cousin's shoulder, raising her eyebrows at what was written in his notebook. He was supposed to be doing his math homework, but, by the looks of things, it seemed like he had other things on his mind. She sighed, causing Laxus to turn his head around to glare at her. Naruko, get out of my room. The blonde shook her head. Nope. Gramps told me that you have been stuck in your room the whole day with no company. She crossed her arms. And that isn't good. Everyone in the guild is worried about you. Now get your ass downstairs and go to the guild, or God so help me. Her cousin grunted at her words, before glaring at her. She blinked and crossed her arms at him, giving him the look that told him that he better do as she says or else. Grumbling, her cousin stood up and made his way downstairs, ignoring her as he did so. Naruko leaned against the wall and stared at her cousin's room, frowning as she did so. It looked similar to his old room. The walls were covered with his favorite band posters and had a couple of girls wearing bikinis posters as well. She could see her cousin's favorite headphones on the table, next to his school's textbooks. There were some letters scattered around the floor, along with his clothes. At least, some habits didn't change. The only difference between the two rooms was the fact that the walls here were painted blue while his old room had been painted gray. The other difference was the pictures of his father were on the shelves, which his old room never had. She traced the pictures, frowning when she noticed a pretty young woman with light brown hair standing beside her uncle and was holding a baby. Was that baby Laxus? It must be, which means the young woman was his mother. Naruko traced the young woman's features, noticing how her cousin had more of his mother's features than his father. She frowned. What happened to his mother? Now that she thought about it, her uncle never talked about his wife. Her grandfather never talked about her and she wondered why. Was she dead? Most likely, seeing as Laxus would have gone to her if that is the case. But still, there was a lot of things she doesn't know about her family and maybe she should start asking her grandfather about the other members of their family. She shook her head and walked out of the room, heading downstairs but stopped when she heard voices coming from the living room. She hesitated. Should she make her presence known? Or should she listen into the conversation? It wouldn't hurt her to listen into the conversation and it isn't like she would tell anyone about it. So you're the one that the Hokage had sent to watch over my granddaughter. Naruko frowned. You're barely a man. I don't know if I feel safe in letting a young man like you, watching over Naruko. Do you know what the dangers are? The Hokage has told me, sir. For some strange reason, she felt like she knew that voice but, how could she? She had lived all her life with her grandfather, not once had she lived in another city. Yet, this voice felt familiar. It felt like she should know who this man was but she couldn't find it in herself to remember whom the man was. You aren't one of those men that would hurt her, are you? No, of course not. His tone was shocked. I would never hurt Sensei's daughter. I want to be certain. I still remembered what happened when I left with Naruko. Her grandfather snapped. I don't want her to feel that hatred again. Naruko frowned at this and inched closer to hear what happened but found that she couldn't hear them. Damn it, it still wasn't close enough for her to hear. She couldn't go any further or else her grandfather will catch her and scold her. Still, she was curious about what they were talking about. The man knew who her father was and it seemed like her grandfather doesn't trust this man. And what did her grandfather meant by he remembered what happened with her? Did something happen to her? And what hatred? Why would some unknown guy hate her? There were so many questions that she now has but none of them can be answered. Not unless she admits to her grandfather she had listened into their conversation. By the way, there is someone is standing by the staircase. The man's tone held a hint of amusement. That would be Naruko. Her grandfather sighed. Naruko, you can come out now. The blonde stiffened and came into the living room, smiling sheepishly at her grandfather before staring at the man that her grandfather was talking to. He had spiky silver hair and has familiar dark-colored eye and had one eye covered by a headband and the rest of his face was covered by a mask. He had no emotions in his face but Naruko could tell that he seemed curious about her but that isn't what interested her, what did was. Why do you wear a mask? And do you really know my father? Can you tell me about him? And what did you mean by hatred? And why must someone protect me? And why does grandfather think you will hurt me? She took in deep breath. And why do you seem so familiar to me? Have we met before? Oh, and what's your name? Her grandfather laughed at her questions while the silver-haired man looked at her with wide eyes. My name is Kakashi Hatake. Your father was my teacher and I can tell you a lot of things about your father and your mother. Naruko looked at him with wide eyes. As for why your grandfather think I will hurt you is because well, a lot of people want to see you hurt because of who your father was. Because he killed so many people, Naruko said sadly. The man nodded and reluctantly said, yes, because of that. And why do you seem so familiar to me? She prompted. Because I have a feeling that we have met before. I don't think so. Naruko frowned but didn't bother pressing the matter. Instead she asked the one thing that has been bothering her since she learned that this man knew her father. Since you knew my father then you knew my mother, right? The silver-haired man nodded at her question, causing her to smile. She opened her mouth to ask even more questions but her grandfather shot her the look that told her to be quiet. Naruko crossed her arms at him and pouted, causing her grandfather to laugh at her and the young man to chuckle at her. Her grandfather shook his head at her and ruffled her hair, having an amused glint in his eyes. Why don't you take Kakashi-san to the guild? Her grandfather suggested, and on the way, he will tell you all the stories about your parents. Naruko beamed at this and took the man's hand, dragging him towards the guild. This was going to be a fun day. Kakashi will be the first to admit that he had been hesitant in taking the job that the Hokage had been. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see his sensei's child, knowing that the young girl have her father's appearance but, As soon as he heard her speak, he knew that it wouldn't be hard not to look at the girl. She was a mixture of her parents. Though she had more of her father's traits in her, but the rest of her personality was herself. So Kakashi-san, how did my father come to teaching you? Kakashi frowned at her question and answered. Well, the Hokage told him to teach me, so he did. Oh, she raised her eyebrows. Was he a good teacher? To me, he was. Naruko nodded her head and started to hum a little tune. Kakashi shrugged his shoulders and scanned the area, trying to see if there were any assassins in the area. By the looks of things, there wasn't anything harmful in this area. If anything, it was quite peaceful, which makes him wonder why his sensei would leave this place. His father looked to be a kind man, reminding him of the current Hokage, and it looked like life here is great. He stopped walking when he noticed that the blue-eyed girl was standing in front of a big building. He frowned and raised his eyebrows at her. She shook her head at him, grinning as she pushed open the door and revealed a huge dining hall in front of him. He couldn't help but gawk at the sight in front of him. There were just so many people in this place. There had to be more than 300 people here, and all of them seemed to be fighting. Kakashi, welcome to Fairy Tail, Naruko said, grinning at him. She ducked as a table was thrown in their direction. It's the strongest guild in all of Fury as well as the most troublemaking one. I can tell. The blonde smiled sheepishly before scanning the room for someone while he looked at the guild with interest. Almost everyone in the guild was fighting, from the old people to some of the young kids in the room. Hell, he could see kids as young as Naruko fighting against older people, and that was saying something. What the hell was wrong with these people? Kana-chan! Naruko yelled, snapping him from his thoughts. He watched in amusement as the blue-eyed girl tackle a pretty brown-haired girl to the ground. From the smile on the girl's face, it seemed like they are used to it, and by the looks of things, they are very close friends. He frowned. He wondered if the girl would have a friend if she had stayed in Konoha. Probably not. Even till this day, the village still despises the mention of the Jinchuriki. Who's the old guy behind you? Her friend asked, staring at him with interest. And Naru-chan, you're killing me. That's Kakashi-san, Naruko said, releasing her friend from her hug. He is a student of my dad apparently. Really? So is he a? Yup. They let old people become shinobi. Kakashi's eyebrows twitch at this comment, and he couldn't help but say. I'm not old, but you have silver hair. They yelled. Only old people have that. Are you sure that you aren't old? Kakashi sighed at the two kids and silently started to regret for taking this mission. Now he is stuck in this place for the next 2 years, watching over a little girl that seemed to believe that he is old, and with her friend that has the same belief. Why oh why did he agree to do this job? He should kill himself the next time he is offered such a job. Kakashi-san, can you tell us a story about my parents? Pretty please. I promise I won't call you an old man, Naruko said, looking at him with pleading eyes. Maybe, it wouldn't be so bad watching over her. Naruko Uzumaki snickered quietly from her hiding place on the roof of the building. Her blue eyes twinkle in anticipation as she waited anxiously for her unknowing target to turn up. It wasn't long before her victim came. She grinned when she saw that the new victim was a scowling Laxus, who was muttering several cuss words. It seemed like he wasn't in a good mood, but then again, when was he in a good mood? It had been nearly 2 years since her uncle had been excommunicated, and he still hasn't gotten over it. She was worried about him because of that. She thought he would get over it after a year, but a year has passed and he still wasn't showing any signs of being her loving cousin. The happy Laxus she knows was replaced with a Laxus, who was angry, bitter, and was even arrogant now. Her grandfather said he would get over it and he would return back to normal soon, but it doesn't seem like it. She really wanted her favorite cousin back. Not this bastard, who only thinks of himself. She shook her head at this thought and returned her attention on the prank. Laxus didn't seem to be in a hurry, strolling through the streets and looking around the shops with a nasty scowl on his face. He glared at the girls who were whispering quietly to each other, no doubt talking about her cousin. Naruko grimaced. Maybe, it will be a good idea to stop him before he sets off the prank. She rubbed her chin and stared at her scowling cousin, shaking her head. No, it might teach him a lesson on not to be arrogant. Arrogance can get a person killed, as Kakashi always tell her when he tells her stories about his home. She watched as her cousin came closer and closer to the trap. Naruko hid her mouth behind her hand to stop the urge to snicker and alert her cousin of her prank. This was the only part about pranks that Naruko really hated, having to wait for so long for some people to actually get themselves stuck. She stopped fidgeting and watched intently as Laxus started to walk again, left foot, right foot, left. The result was immediate. As Laxus attempted to take another step forward, he almost tripped as the right foot didn't follow and was somewhat stuck to the ground underneath him. Laxus was confused, then furious as he tried to pull his foot up from the ground, which was stuck down with the glue that Naruko had borrowed from Kakashi. Laxus tried harder to move his foot, when his shoes flew from his foot, or at least, his foot finally moved, but the sole of the shoes were no longer there. This caused her cousin to wave as he lost his balance, and had to step back a few steps, but, as he did so, his legs hit another trap and triggered the next part. From one of the shop's door, a bucket of glue, and from another a bucket of feathers flew down towards him, making the preteen boy look like a chicken. A very interesting prank, Naru-chan. Now I understand why you insisted in borrowing my glue. Kakashi. Naruko nearly lost her footing on the roof when she saw a smiling Kakashi was standing right behind her. Smiling sheepishly, she rubbed her neck and laughed nervously while the silver-haired man stared at her cousin, who was now yelling several curse words to them. I can explain myself. Oh, explain what? Kakashi asked, tilting his head at her. This isn't really any of my business, is it? It makes me wonder how your grandfather would react if he knew you've been the one pranking Laxus for the past couple of weeks. I didn't really mean for Laxus to be caught in the prank. Well, I did, but I just wanted to teach my cousin a little lesson on humility. He raised his eyebrows at her. Look, he's been acting like a real asshole for the past year, and I know why, but it doesn't mean he has the right to act like it. He acts like Gramps wasn't hurt when he excommunicated Ivan Oji-san. That may be true, but you don't have to constantly prank him, Kakashi said, pointing to her cousin who was currently being laughed at by the other kids. Now, you should be a good little girl and go apologize to your cousin as well as help him by getting rid of the glue and feathers. Come on, he deserved to be shown like a chicken. I guess I can always tell Makarov-san that it was. All right, I'll do it. Smiling, Kakashi ruffled her hair, and before she knows it, the young man is gone and she's alone on the roof of the building. She grinned. Since she was alone now, it means she could always go back to the guild and let Laxus deal with the humiliation. Then again, Kakashi always seemed to know when she doesn't really clean after the prank, and she really doesn't want her grandfather to know it had been her pranking Laxus the whole time. He would scold her about how she was supposed to be a good cousin to Laxus and how family shouldn't be doing this to each other. She had that rant last week, when she punched one of the members of the guild for saying that ramen didn't taste good. To hear the same rant again would get so annoying and boring, which might end up with her yawning, and she doesn't want her grandfather to realize she never listens to his rants. She loved her grandfather to death, but his rants were getting boring for her. Naruko jumped down from the roof and quietly snickered at her cousin, who still looked like a big chicken. Maybe she should take a picture of this and sell it to the people in the guild. Goodness knows they will love her prank. This was actually her 5th prank this year and her 5th prank in her life overall. Kakashi was the blame for getting her into the pranks because he told her so many stories about her parents and how her mother used to do pranks. Of course, she wanted to imitate her mother in some way, and the only way she can actually imitate her was through the pranks. Get me out of this mess, Naruko. Laxus snarled, snapping her out of her thoughts. She quickly stifled her laughter as her cousin waved his fist threateningly at her. Normally it would be scary, however, with him looking like a chicken, well, the effect is totally gone. Naruko tapped her chin and asked, "And what do I get in return, Laxus-Nisan? You know I don't do these things for free." "Well, I won't tell Gramps that it was you who had done the fucking prank." He snapped, and Naruko raised her eyebrows at him. How the hell did Laxus know it had been her pranking him and not one of the other members of the guild? She frowned. Maybe she made her pranks too obvious for him to realize it was her, and she was kind of easy to see through, as Kana will tell her. "How the hell did you know it was me?" "I didn't, but thanks for confirming my theory that it's been you," Laxus said, struggling to get the feathers out of his clothes. "What the hell was the glue that you used, Naruko?" It doesn't seem to be easy to get rid of. Superglue, of course. Naruko deadpanned. And I used it for your shoes as well. It's the only good strong glue in the house and it's also the cheapest. Laxus' eyebrows twitched at her words, muttering something about how he should tell their grandfather on not allowing her to buy any glue. She rubbed her chin as she thought about the fastest way to get rid of the glue. Her wind magic was out of the way, since it will simply speed up the drying process and water might do but it might not do. Going home was the only way to get rid of the feathers and the glue. I really hate your pranks, Naruko. I don't know why the fucking hell you decided to prank me and not someone else from the guild. Laxus grumbled, pulling one of the feathers out of his body, wincing as he did so. You could be practicing your magic and become stronger instead of deciding to do something as stupid as this. I prank you because you're being such an asshole to everyone. Especially to Gramps, Naruko snapped, slapping his hand when he tried to get rid of the feathers. You know as well as I do that Gramps must have a good reason for doing what he did to Uncle. If that's the case, then why the hell won't he tell us? Laxus snarled, glaring at her. Maybe he doesn't think we would understand. Or maybe he thinks we aren't ready to know yet. Naruko yelled right back at him, jabbing her finger on his chest. You know, Laxus Neeson, that Gramps was hurt when he did this. You know Uncle was the only son he had alive and he loved him a lot. If that's the case, then why did he do it? I'm a kid, Laxus. How am I supposed to know why Gramps did what he did? Naruko asked impatiently. Because he's a lot closer to you than he's with me. Naruko frowned, noticing there was a trace of bitterness and jealousy in his tone. He never scolds you about anything. Except for the fights you get into in school. And he doesn't ever look like he's disappointed in your behavior. Naruko opened her mouth to protest but closed it when she realizes she can't remember a time where their grandfather has scolded her about something that isn't about the fights or remember a time when he's disappointed in her behavior. Her cousin shot a triumph look and she glared at him. Just because their grandfather doesn't scold her, doesn't mean he hasn't been disappointed in her. Yeah, well, at least Gramps doesn't think you act like Uncle. He always makes comments about how I sometimes behave like my father. Naruko hissed, grabbing Laxus' hand and dragging him home. Do you know how that feels? I used to love being compared to him but now it's getting annoyed. It feels like I'm just a replacement for him. Laxus stopped walking and Naruko closed her eyes, taking in deep breaths before turning around to look at her cousin. He sighed at her and reluctantly said, You know Gramps doesn't think of you like that. Sure, he compares you to him but he doesn't mean it intentionally and he really cares for you. I know, but I sometimes feel like he doesn't see me as Naruko Uzumaki. Naruko admitted, letting go of her cousin's hands. And it annoys me because I'm not my father. And I'll never be like my father because I can't imagine doing the things he's done. You mean like being a shinobi because you think it is a horrible job? Laxus deadpanned. No, I can actually imagine myself being a shinobi, Naruko answered truthfully, though she was reluctant to answer. I mean, I just can't imagine going to Gramps' homeland because of Gramps and you. I can't imagine my life without you or Gramps, and I guess that's why I've been pranking you, because it feels like I'm losing my favorite cousin. I'm only cousin, Laxus pointed out dryly. Doesn't mean you have to be my favorite cousin, Laxus. Naruko crossed her arms at him before her eyes softened. And I'm sorry for the pranks, but I don't want to lose my cousin. And I don't like it when my cousin acts like jerk, especially to Gramps. He's already has a lot stress as it is and you aren't making it better by treating him like this. Naru-chan, and you know I hate the scowl in your face and the fact you seem to forget that you're the only one hurt by what happened and the fact you won't let go of it. It's been nearly 2 years, Laxus, since it happened and it's time to let go. Naruko gulped. It's like you forget that me and Gramps are also a part of the family. You may have lost Ivan Ojasan but it doesn't mean you don't have us. Laxus blinked his eyes at her words and Naruko took several breaths, rubbing her eyes till it was dry of her tears. She hates her cousin for making her cry because of this. She hated crying because it makes her feel weak. And Naruko Uzumaki isn't weak. She's the granddaughter of a wizard saint and a member of the strongest guild in Fury as well as the daughter of 2 strong shinobi. Well, that's what Kakashi tells her. Yet when it comes to the matter of the guild or her cousin, then the whole thing changes. When her cousin glares at someone or tell them they are trash or weak, It breaks her heart because she knows the reason why he is acting like this. It isn't because he's cocky, though it was a part of the reason, but it is because he is still angry with their grandfather. It's like everyone forgot how her cousin used to be. It's like everyone forgot how he used to be kind and loving. She hates this. You know Laxus, the person you're acting like isn't the Laxus Neeson I know, Naruko said finally, staring at her cousin. The Laxus Neeson I know doesn't call his nakama trash and he doesn't ever treat Gramps like this. He always give me smiles and teases me, not scowl at me. Yeah well that Laxus didn't have his father expelled from the guild. Her eyes softened at her cousin's words and said, yeah, he didn't and I can't understand Laxus Neeson how you feel about it, but it'll be nice if you could act at least a little bit nicer to Gramps and play with me and Kana again. Can you please? I can't do that again, Naruko, and I can't be the cousin you want me to be again, but I'll try to be a little bit nicer to everyone. Naruko grinned at this. But don't think it means I'll be the same person as I was before. No, but it means you're a little bit more bearable. Laxus rolled his eyes at her comment and Naruko grinned. Maybe, things will go back to normal between him and their grandfather. She only wanted the best for her family and she would do anything for them. Believe it. What are you reading, Naruko? Naruko looked up from her book to see Kakashi peering over her. She grinned at the silver-haired man and gestured for him to sit down beside her. He chuckled and took the seat beside her. Kakashi was one of the nicest people she knows. He always tells her stories about her parents, like how they acted around each other to her father's reaction in learning he was going to be parent. She loved learning about that side of her father because it made it seem all she had learned about him being a killer was a lie. Through she knows it can't be a lie because Kakashi was the proof of her father having done the wrong things. He was a great man from what Kakashi described, and maybe he would have been a wonderful father to her, but it doesn't change the fact he left the family. He didn't do the best thing for Gramps when he left the guild, through if he hadn't left then maybe she wouldn't have been born. It really does make it complicated, doesn't it? So what are you reading? Kakashi asked, snapping her out of her thoughts. Tales of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja. Naruko answered quietly as she looked down on the book. It was the only fiction book I could find in the library that I haven't read. Oh, what do you think about it so far? Naruko pondered at his question and looked down at the age-worn book. It speaks a lot about ninjas as expected since it is about a ninjas, which was an occupation she truly dislikes. Yet, it wasn't like anything she expected a shinobi like. Through it does prove her idea on how she wouldn't like to have their life and makes her even more curious on why her father did. Why choose such a horrible occupation? Why leave the family for something like this? Her grandmother had left it as her grandfather once told her and her cousin, a year ago on her Gram's anniversary. There was a reason why her grandmother left it and she understands it, but she can't understand why her father decided to leave the guild for it. She could never comprehend the idea of killing someone for a job. Kakashi tells her it isn't always like that, but she wasn't stupid. She knows it was mostly like that because Kakashi tells her about the war her father had been famous in. Wars causes so many deaths. This was something her grandfather and history teacher told her. Well, what do you think about it? It has a good plotline and I'm rather fond of the character Naruto. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy to give up, and Gramps always tell me that one should never give up. She smiled, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. He's kind of an idiot, but I think that what makes him a lovable character, so far, and his dream is a good dream. To break the curse that haunts the shinobi, which I think is hatred because hatred can be seen as curse, can't it? Because hatred can kill a person, or that's what Gramps tell me when he sees just how angry Laxus is. She frowned. You know the writer should have checked his spelling and grammar, because if he fixed it then there's no doubt it would be a bestseller. Kakashi chuckled at her response and she pouted at him. And how do you think he would get them to break the curse? I can't really make a decision until I get to know him more, can I? Naruko retorted. The silver-haired man shook his head. If it was you in that story, then how would you go about in destroying their hatred then? She blinked her eyes at him before furrowing her eyebrows in concentration. What would she do if she was in this guy's place, huh? She would probably go with the idea of hitting the people cursed until they understand the idea that they should let go of their hatred. But that's not practical and a very stupid course of action, so there has to be another way in breaking the curse, right? She looked at her grandfather, who was talking with Laxus, and nodded her head when she realized what her answer would be. I'll probably try and get them to talk to each other and make friends with them, or at the very least try to make them understand how they feel between each other. Naruko said, smiling at him. Because I think people hate each other because they don't understand each other. If they did understand each other, then they might see how they're so similar to each other. Do you really believe that? Kakashi asked, raising his eyebrows at her. Why wouldn't I? I think people can misunderstand each other for the wrong reasons, and the reason people hate shinobi is because they kill people, Naruko answered sincerely, looking down at her book. They kill people, who may have been a son, a daughter, a mother or a father, and that is the wrong thing to do. Because who are shinobi to decide who deserve to die or not? Sometimes situations calls for it, Naruko, and sometimes we have no choice because we're ordered to do it, or if it's a life and death situation, Kakashi explained, giving her a serious look. It may sound horrible, but this is the life of a shinobi. But it isn't the life of a legal mage guild. Naruko pushed a hair strand behind her ear. And I just wonder, how does a shinobi handle it? I mean, don't you feel guilty if you ever meet your victims' families? They must feel so sad and angry because you took away their loved one, and they would wonder why you would do it. What gave you the right to do it? I mean, they'll know it was a job, but it still won't change how they will feel. If I ever meet the victims' families, then yes, I guess I would feel guilty, but then again I might not. Why the hell not? Because I've killed so many people, Naruko, and I barely remember the faces of those who I've killed. Kakashi answered. The ones I do remember clearly are the ones I do feel guilty for killing. Naruko frowned and looked down at her hands, gulping as she tried to picture the faceless people whom Kakashi killed. How many people did Kakashi kill? It must be a lot because he barely remembers the people he had killed. She frowned. How long have Kakashi been killing people? It must have been a long time for him to kill so many people, which makes Naruko curious about something. How old must one become a shinobi? Do these people have limits about who should and shouldn't become a shinobi? They should have limits because they can't possibly expect a 5-year-old kid to kill someone. It was just wrong. Kids are supposed not to know what it is like to have blood in their hands, and they must have some kind of problems. If kids were killing as her uncle told her, then those kids must be scarred in some way. That makes her feel sad. Did my father, did he ever feel guilty for killing people? Kakashi blinked his eyes at her question and raised his eyebrow at her, but she simply shrugged her shoulders at him, looking at him expectantly. That had been one of the things that made Minato-sensei different from every shinobi in our world. While others knew it was in the job description and accepted it, he didn't. It was clear to me, Minato-sensei disliked killing, and though he did kill a lot of people, I think he felt extremely guilty for killing those people, and he once told me and my team that we should avoid killing people, when we can. That's good to know, Naruko said, smiling faintly. It's good to know my father did feel those things, and he did at least took Gramps' teachings to heart. It was good to know her father did learn something from her grandfather, but it still makes her curious to know why he chose a shinobi's life over the life of a mage. The stories and questions can't give her a clue or an idea, but it does tell her the kind of man her father had been. Her father may have been a killer and she may be disgusted with it, but he was a man she can respect because he did try to teach Kakashi and his team that they shouldn't always kill people. It'll be a long time before she can actually forgive her father for leaving her grandparents the way he did. It has been weeks since she learns that her father had felt guilty for killing people, and not a lot of things have happened in Fairy Tail. She had gone on a mission with Laxus and Kakashi. Their mission had been a complete success, of course, through her cousin had made her apologies several times to the villagers because he destroyed their properties. She really wished he hadn't, because now their Gramps was going to have to pay for it. She really pitied her grandfather for having to deal with them. You seem to be really tired lately, Naru-chan, Kana said, taking a seat beside her as Naruko yawned. Have you been getting enough sleep, Naru-chan? Have you been studying hard for school again? No, I haven't been studying late at night. And as for sleep, well, I've gotten plenty, but the last mission had messed up with my sleep. Naruko put her head on the table. Honestly, the paid haven't been worth the trouble we went through. What happened, Naru-chan? Laxus destroyed a couple of building the village, including the mayor's house. Naruko said, rubbing her forehead as she remembered the apologies she had to make to the guy. Why she had thought 2 years ago that it was a good thing, she can't remember. And Kakashi and me have to make so many apologies to them and promise that we would pay for the damage. You know, Laxus should learn by now that he shouldn't cause so much damage because Gramps is going to be the one paying for it. Just knowing what the price is, going to make him cry. It even makes me want to cry because of the damage. How much is he going to pay? Naruko grimaced as she remembered the number she had been told and muttered. Nearly 800,000 jewels. Kana's jaw dropped at the price before turning to stare at her grandfather, who was currently talking to some moping boy. Does he know what Laxus did? I didn't tell Gramps because if he knew what my cousin did then hell will break loose and I don't want that. Especially when he learns that Laxus was going to make him pay so much money. He will certainly yell at him before crying out loud about the price he would have to pay. Naruko answered, grimacing, glancing at Makarov, who kept nodding his head as he talked to the mopey boy. I don't want him to start crying and then yelling at Laxus for being reckless before, looking at me and then telling me privately he expected me to make sure Laxus doesn't do anything stupid. He won't seriously say that. Kana shook her head. He would never say something like that. Yes, but that is how I feel about not controlling Laxus from destroying those buildings, and it doesn't help Kakashi didn't have the heart to stop him. She scowled. I thought he would help me with this. That's why I agreed for him to come with us. Not because you wanted to hear more stories about your parents? Kana asked, raising her eyebrows at her. Naruko flushed deep red at this question before reluctantly nodding her head at her friend. Yes, this was one of the reasons why she agreed for Kakashi to come with them. The stories he told her and Laxus were definitely worth the trouble because it was the first time in 2 years since he actually laughed as hard as he did. He laughed at the fact her father had been hit by her mother so many times. Naruko! Shouted Makarov. Naruko frowned and jumped off from her seat, waving to Kana, who looked at Makarov with a small frown. She hurriedly made her way towards her grandfather, smoothing her orange shirt while she walks to her grandfather. Gramps, she asked once she reached her grandfather. Her gaze would often shifted from the smiling old man to the mopey boy beside him. Naruko, can you bring the guild stamp for me? He asked, smiling politely at her. She raised her eyebrows at him as she nodded, staring at the scowling boy beside him who had his arms crossed before heading off to get the stamp. Quickly she finds it behind the bar. She headed back towards her grandfather with a rubber stamp clasped tightly in her hand. She holds the guild stamp tightly, looking at the sad boy who was staring at the guild with awe and interest. Was this boy going to join their guild? She hopes so because there aren't many kids their age in this guild. The only ones that are kids in this guild are her and Kana, while others were just adults and teenagers. Here it is, Gramps, Naruko said, smiling at her grandfather. Her grandfather stared at the guild stamp in her hands for a brief moment before looking at her and giving her a big smile. Why don't you do it, Naru-chan? You want me to do it? Why not Kana? She always the one who's doing it, Gramps. Naruko asked in surprise. Why not you? Anyone with the fairy tale mark is capable of marking another with the stamp, he explained, smiling at her. If that's what you want me to do then okay, Gramps, she said, frowning, turning to face the newcomer. Where would you like it to be? Your shoulder, your hand. Wait, what's a guild stamp? Naruko frowned and asked, didn't the master tell you about guild stamps? Shaking his head, the boy scratched his head, looking every bit confused. Naruko frowned at this response, turning to face her grandfather, who seemed to be whistling at her. Was her grandfather testing her patience or something? Or did he simply forget to explain to the boy? Most likely the latter, since he had been too busy dealing with the council and his stupid paperwork. Everyone who joins a guild must have an official guild mark, as it is proof that they're a member of the guild, Naruko explained, looking at her grandfather to confirm her words. He nodded and the blue-eyed girl continued on. It can cause quite a problem if one doesn't have a guild mark and then claims to be a part of the guild, because then the guild has to deal with the problem. To fix that problem, everyone decided that every guild, be it a legal or dark guild, must have a guild mark, or that's what I think. Naruko, you shouldn't say things you don't know. Well, it'll be troublesome if he asked why this was the case, Naruko said, crossing her arms against her chest. And Gramps, you don't seem so eager to explain it to him. Now where do you want me to put it? The boy blinked his eyes and quickly answered. On the right side of my chest. Naruko gulped at this and turned to look at her grandfather pleadingly. He can't seriously expect her to do this, right? Because she really feels uncomfortable with the idea of seeing a boy strip and then touching his chest to put the mark on him. She shook her head furiously at this thought, knowing if she was a part of the guild then she will have to endure this and get past this. Still, she never thought it would be like this. So what color do you want it to be? She asked, tilting her head. I can actually pick the color of my guild mark, he asked, staring wide-eyed at her. She smiled and nodded her head, pointing at her own guild mark, which was on the back of her hand and was the color orange. Of course you get to pick the color of the guild mark. We're a part of the same guild, but we're all different people who have different preference on where they like their mark to be in its color. If Gramps had his way, then the girl's guild mark won't be there, right? And Naruko-chan, you still remembered what I said. I can't ever forget what you said, Gramps, especially when you're drunk off your ass, Naruko retorted, grimacing at her grandfather before giving a huge smile to the dark-haired boy, raising his eyebrow at them. Now that I answered your question, why don't you tell me what color do you want it to be? I want it to be dark blue, he replied, taking off his shirt. Naruko flushed deep red at the sight of the boy's chest, which seemed to be slightly wiry and shows promise of being muscular when he grows older. She was really starting to regret agreeing to do what her grandfather asked her to do, but she can't back out now. She already agreed to mark the boy, so if she doesn't do it, then it shows she is a coward. Which she isn't. Still, she have one question to ask. Why the hell did you take your pants off, pervert? She screeched, trying not to look at the boy's underwear. I didn't take off my pants. And I'm not a pervert. The boy yelled, gesturing to his underwear before looking down to prove his point. However, his face flushed deep red when he realized he was indeed not wearing any pants. Shit, where the hell is my pants? Naruko's eyebrows twitched in annoyance and she had the urge to slap the boy for not knowing where his pants were, but she held it in. Her grandfather will be furious with her if she slaps the boy silly for not knowing where his own pants were. Through, he does deserve to be slapped because of this. Honestly, what kind of person doesn't know where his own pants are? Is he trying to be funny or something? Because this isn't in any way or form funny to her. Why the hell does this happen to me? The boy muttered, searching hard for his pants. Naruko rubbed the sides of her head before looking around the guild for the dark-haired boy's pants and quickly finds it beside Kakashi, who was too busy reading his book. Immediately she runs to get it before the silver-haired man noticed the pants, which she hopes it doesn't happen, because the man would tease her mercilessly when he learns what happened. She quickly ran to get his pants, snatching it from the stool, and was about to leave, only to stop at the sound of someone chuckling. She turned around to see Kakashi raising his visible eyebrow and looking amused at her. So Naru-chan, is there something you aren't telling me about? No. Whose pants is that? Kakashi asked, inspecting it closely. It looks like a boy's pants, and you're not a boy, so do you have a boyfriend I don't know about? Of course not. Boys are icky, Naruko screeched. This is some idiotic boy who was stupid enough to strip his pants away. Oh, you've boys stripping for you, Naruko? Kakashi asked, chuckling as the young girl flushed red at this comment. But you're too young for these things, Naru-chan. You should wait for these type of things when you're older. Naruko nodded her head at him and scurried to get away from the chuckling young man, who quickly went back to reading his perverted books, to her grandfather and the panicking boy. That had to be one of the most embarrassing short conversations she ever had with the silver-haired man. Her face turned a brighter shade of red as she remembered how the man advised her to wait for these things when she is older. She didn't know what he was talking about, but it had to be something perverted. I found your pants. And listen to me, pervert, if you forget your pants ever again, I won't help you again. Naruko said firmly, handing the boy his pants again. He gulped and vigorously nodded his head as he put his pants back on while Makarov chuckled at her words. She waited till the boy put his pants back on before snatching the guild stamp from her grandfather's hands. Now that we find your pants, I want you to sit down. While she gulped, I stamp you with the guild mark, all right? The boy nodded his head, turning around to face her, and she counted till 10, hoping for her blush to die down. Why did this boy have to decide his chest of all places? Why not his hand or even his shoulder? She couldn't look at the boy's chest without flushing red since she never seen a person's chest. Her cousin doesn't do this and the other males of the guild knows better than to do this in front of her because Kakashi would kill them, or even her grandfather. Well, are you going to put it or not? The boy stuttered, scowling at her. It's my first time putting this. So give me a minute to calm down my nerves. Naruko snapped, glaring at the boy. She took in a deep breath before marking the boy's right chest with the official insignia. It glowered and shimmered briefly before settling on his chest. Well, that's done, Naruko said, smiling widely at the boy. Now you can put your shirt back on. My name is Naruko Uzumaki. It's nice to meet you. What's your name? The boy nodded, looking left to right before frowning and then gulping, shaking his head, and then in a reluctant voice he asked, My name is Gray Fullbuster, and I'm wondering, have you seen my shirt? Naruko groaned, silently realizing that this might become an occurring theme in the guild. 3 weeks had passed since Gray had joined Fairy Tail and nothing much changed, except for the fact that Naruko now had a new acquaintance to hang with whenever Kana was out on a mission, as well as someone to rant to when she had an argument with her cousin or her grandfather. To be honest, Gray was a great person to hang with. He told the funniest of jokes and made the most sarcastic comments she heard. Unfortunately, he always seemed grumpy. Well, sad was better way to describe his mood, but she rather preferred to consider him grumpy than sad. No one in the guild noticed that Gray never gave them a real smile or really ever laughed at the jokes. Sure, he made sarcastic comments, which always seemed to make her want to punch him, and of course he also got made some comments that made him get into fights with the other kids, mostly her. Yet whenever Gray didn't seem to think anyone was watching, he would look sad and guilty, discarding any illusion that she had of him being normal kid. She knew that it shouldn't be any of her business, but she never liked it when a member of their guild was sad. If a member of their guild was sad, then they were all sad, and the last thing Naruko wanted was to be sad. Speaking of sadness, why are you frowning, Naruko? Gray asked, taking a seat beside her as she took a small sip of the banana smoothie that the barmaid had kindly offered to give her. He looked so concerned that the blonde sighed, shaking her head at him. If she didn't know how Gray could be sweet at times, then she would have thought that he was pranking her. She could smell a prank from a mile away. She was the queen of pranks when it came to their guild and in her school. So pranking her would have been difficult for Gray to do anyway. She shook her head at this thought and looked at Gray carefully, wondering whether she should be blunt on what she was thinking about or bring the topic in slowly, luring him to the false sense of security. At least then he wouldn't run away from the topic. Should she be blunt? Should she lure him in having a false sense of security? With much thought and consideration, she decided that it would be better if she was blunt with him. I was thinking that you've been here for 3 weeks already and you're still moping around. Gray's eyebrows shot to his hairlines and started to make sounds of protesting. Naruko snorted at his protests, waving her hand off at his words. Please, do you think I'm stupid? I always make sure to observe our new members to see if there is something I can use for a prank against them. With you, I notice that you look so sad whenever you think no one is watching you and always look guilty. I don't look guilty. Sure you don't, and my grandfather isn't a pervert. Naruko crossed her arms at him. You know that if you frown, then I'm going to start thinking that you don't like Fairy Tail. And I don't really want to think that or tell people that, so what's troubling you? It isn't any of your business. It becomes my business when you joined the guild. Naruko took a sip of her drink before taking a couple of deep breaths. You see, I don't know if Gramps told you or if I ever told you this, but when a member of our guild is sad, then we're sad. And do you know how much I hate seeing people look sad? A lot. Damn right. It's annoying and frustrating because being sad won't fix any of your problems. She stared at Gray. I don't know why you're sad or guilty, and I'm not going to push you about it. I really want to push you for answers, but Gramps taught me better than that. He told me never to poke your nose to anyone's business. Your point? Gray asked, raising his eyebrows as he stared at the blonde. She stared right back at him, playing with the edge of her skirt as she tried to think about what she was trying to say to him. Naruko wasn't going to lie when she said that she didn't know how to communicate her words properly. That was something her Gramps, Laxus and Kana had pointed out whenever they found out about her fights in school. Obviously, she didn't want to have an argument and didn't want to cause problems between them because as much as she was reluctant to admit this, Gray was the only male friend she had. The only guy her age that she could get along with well, and didn't dislike with an inch of her life. Sure, she despised his stripping habits, but she was really trying to ignore it. Really trying was the key word here. Well, Naruko, your point. I'm trying to say that if you need someone to talk to about your sadness or anything like that, then you can talk to us. We're members of the same guild, which makes us practically family. Naruko beamed. In fact, since we're family, why don't I tell you something about myself? And you do the same thing. What if I don't want to tell you everything? You don't have to tell me everything. Naruko nodded her head savagely. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not going to push you to say anything you don't want to say, I promise. All right, Gray finally said, and Naruko grinned. But you go first. Fair enough, Naruko said, rubbing her chin as she stared at him. I guess I'll start with my name. My name is Uzumaki Naruko, and the guild master is my grandfather, making Laxus my cousin. If you haven't met him, then I'll tell you that he's a lovable asshole. You just need to dig really deep to see it. My parents are dead, had been since the day I was born, so I really don't have any memories of them. How did they die? Gray looked at her wide-eyed. He frowned when Naruko raised her eyebrows at him, looking at him with thoughtfulness. He added hastily, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I'm all right in telling you about how they die because, to be honest, I never really knew them, so I can't really be sad about the way they died. Naruko twirled her straw in circles, smiling widely at him. My parents died protecting their village from a demon that nearly destroyed the village they had been living. Apparently, my dad killed the demon and my mom died giving birth to me, or something like that. How did your dad kill the demon? Gray had a strange look on his face as he stared at her, looking not only curious but also furious as he asked. Naruko looked out at the window, shrugging her shoulders at him. I don't know. I asked Kakashi and he said that he didn't know how he did it, said that no one in the village knew how it happened. She looked around the room to see if anyone was watching them before gesturing for him to come closer to her. He raised his eyebrow and complied with her wish. Her usual loud voice dropped to a whisper as she continued, but to be honest, I think it's a load of bullshit. No one can actually kill a demon. Demons are immortal, so how can a human kill them? My dad was a genius, but even a genius had his limits. So you don't think your dad killed the demon? If I don't have the proof in front of me, have concrete proof, then you can bet your ass that I would never believe them. Naruko admitted, I like seeing proof since I've no choice but to believe it. If I don't see actual proof, then I would never believe it because I'll think about the countless possibilities of what could actually had happened. So what do you think happened that day? Don't know, but my mind thought that maybe that he just sent the demon away, but convincing him might have resulted him to dying because they might have to fight. Maybe he had been dying but no one knew it, and so he thought maybe the better way for them not to know was to summon a demon and fight it to the point where he was dying. On your birthday. I've an overactive imagination, Naruko admitted, smiling sheepishly at him. But back to my introduction. I like practicing magic and doing pranks. I love reading books, ramen, ice creams, and my family along with the guild. I dislike liars and perverts. I hate people who insult our guild and people who ruin my homework. My dream is to be an S-rank mage of our guild. And surpass every expectation that everyone has of me. Now it's your turn. Do I really have to? Of course. Naruko grinned. I haven't done that and expect nothing in return. You've to tell me something about you, at least your likes, dislikes, and your hobbies. Anything else, you don't have to tell me. I told you all of that because everyone knows this about me and you should know this too. Gray sighed. What will you do if I don't do what you asked? I won't ever help you find your clothes ever again. And I'll make sure finding clothes will be difficult. Naruko chirped. He sighed, causing her to smirk. Now tell me, stripper. Don't call me that, Gray whined, crossing his arms at her. She simply shrugged her shoulders at him, gesturing for him to continue, and he sighed at her. My name is Gray Fullbuster. I like ice cones and anything really cold. I dislike spicy food and really anything hot. I don't really have any hobbies except practicing my magic. Your introduction was short. Well, no one can have a long introduction like you. Gray retorted. Why the hell did you practically tell me your life story? You could have simply told me your likes and dislikes and be done with it. Because unlike you, Mr. Grumpy, I'm an open person. Naruko took a huge gulp of her fruit smoothie. I don't see the point of hiding my past when in the end, people are going to find out. Better to hear it from me than from some stranger you don't know about. You know what I mean, right? Gray frowned before reluctantly nodding his head at her. She smiled at him, putting her legs on the table as she looked at him thoughtfully. Besides, I haven't told you everything, I just summarized myself to you. I've secrets just like you do, and like you, I don't want to remember them or even think about it. I would like to live in the future. What secrets do you have? It won't be a secret if I told you, now would it? If you want to know, then you got to earn it, stripper. Naruko teased. Gray scowled at the nickname before rolling his eyes, muttering under his breath about who would want to know anything about a weirdo like her, and this caused Naruko to scowl at him. She wasn't a weirdo, she was just different from the usual girly girls that hung around the guild. So, do you want to help me prank Gramps? I promise to buy you an ice cream if you helped me. Naruko said, using her puppy dog look to her full extent. Gray grimaced, looking quite uncomfortable with her puppy dog look, and reluctantly nodded his head. Naruko grinned and pulled the boy closer, whispering in his ear of the plan. His eyes widened, and before they realized it, the boy was grinning wildly at her. By the way, Gray, you lost your pants again. Oh shit. Naruko sighed. Come on, I'll help you find your pants. And that was the start of their friendship. I heard from Kakashi-san that you spent a lot of time with Gray while I was gone. Kana said, trying her hardest not to shift under her seat as Naruko sketched her. She really didn't understand why her best friend always kept using her for her art homework, and rarely used Laxus or her own grandfather. She sighed when Naruko shot her an irritated look for moving in her seat. So, I need someone to talk to while you're on missions, Naruko answered, relaxing her grip on her pencil. Kana grinned before frowning, remembering the stories that Kakashi said. He had teased her about how the blonde was replacing her with Gray, which was quite untrue because the two of them had a bond that couldn't be broken. He also said something about how Naruko was just so young to get a boyfriend, which was weird because Kana knew that Naruko didn't like boys like that. Who at their age did? Well, Kakashi said that you're too young to have a boyfriend. Naruko gave Kana a frosty look, and the brunette girl shook her head. Don't give me that look. Look, I know that you don't see guys like that, but I just need to confirm that. Anyways, tell me what Gray is like. I haven't really talked to him since I went on a mission for the past few weeks. Does he still strip? Yes, and you haven't hit him for it. I want to, but I know Gramps will be furious, and from Gray's reactions, I can tell that he doesn't really mean to strip, and that doesn't mean I accept it or anything. I just can't do anything about it. Basically, you thought about how to stop it, but nothing seemed to came into your mind, right? How do you know me so well? We've been friends for 3 wonderful years, wouldn't it be expected that I know you so well? True, Naruko said, beaming as she remembered how their friendship had started. We've been the best of friends for 3 whole years, all right. We have been friends since you joined the guild. Do you remember how we even became friends? Of course, how could I ever forget that day? Kana said, curling her lips into a small smile as she remembered that fateful day. I was just moping around, doing nothing but listening to the stories that Mikao was telling me about, and out of nowhere, you came in and dragged me to the park. And when I asked you why, you told me that we're going to play games and that I was your friend. When you put it in that way, you make me sound rude. Well, I can't argue about that, Kana said, shrugging her shoulders at her. Hey, I know my manners, I just don't like using them. Kana rolled her eyes, causing the blonde to pout. And anyways, I don't remember you complaining about it either. If anything, you look happy that I did that to you, so in a way you can say I saved you from continuing to listening to Mikao for the next couple of years. Whatever you say, Naru-chan. Whatever you say. Come on, you know I saved you from listening to the same old stories. So, Naru-chan, tell me, what is Gray like? Kana crossed her arms as she watched her friend twirled her hair around her finger, looking quite thoughtful for once this whole day, and that made Kana curious. For Naruko to give a look like that told her that Gray was either a mystery to her or she knew something, but she wasn't certain if she should tell her about it. If that was the former, then Kana would declare that the boy was very weird to be mysterious at this age. She really doubted that Gray was mysterious. From Naruko's words earlier it didn't sound like that. If it was the latter, then Kana was definitely curious, because Naruko was good at getting people to open up to her, but not this fast. It took Kana nearly 8 weeks before she had really opened up to her friend about her mother. However, it took Gray 3 weeks. Either Naruko had improved her people skill, or Gray was actually an open person. Knowing her friend, it would probably be the former than the latter. He's a nice person with a horrible habit of stripping, Naruko answered, looking at her friend with a huge smile on her face. He is also a very grumpy guy, Kana, but he's less grumpy than Laxus. It also doesn't help he likes to mope around Kana. That frustrates me because I don't know why and he won't tell me why. I don't mind he won't tell me, but it seriously irritates me when I see a member of our guild moping. We're a happy guild. Anyways, he's also quite creative when it comes to pranks too. He helped me turn my Gramps' office to Winder Wonderland, while I replaced my Gramps' books with storybooks that looked similar to his own. Did your Gramps notice that? Of course he did. He yelled it out for the whole world to hear when he realized that his perverted books were not there and that it was filled with children's books. You're really evil to your grandfather. That'll teach him a lesson on not to bring those books home for me to see. And also how one day, a girl would actually do that to him and would actually burn those books away. The two of you might not see it, but I did it out of love for my grandfather, Naruko said firmly, crossing her arms at Kana. The brunette girl shook her head at this. She knew that Naruko loved her grandfather, but her ways of showing her concern and love was so weird. Honestly, she had the same idea when it came to Laxus, except she had done something worse. So worse that Laxus had actually threatened to never talk to Naruko ever again. Laxus would never threaten Naruko like that. He loved his cousin too much to even think about threatening her about it. Anything else? I need to know. Anything interesting happen in the guild since I left? Not really, unless you count the fact that Mikao and Wakaba are trying to figure out new ways to see what's behind Kakashi's mask, Naruko said, shaking her head at the memory. I don't know why they're so obsessed with the mask. It's just a mask, nothing for them to be curious about. It just makes him seem so mysterious. I mean, haven't you ever wondered what he's hiding behind that mask? Of course I do, and I've tried so many times to find out, but nothing seemed to work. I gave him food, but it all seemed to disappear even when I watched him. I gave him drinks, it didn't work. Hell, I've even tried setting him up with one of the barmaids, followed them, and yet I didn't see them kiss. He's that good. Who's that good? They turned their heads and Kana felt her shoulder relax when she saw it was Gray, who had asked and not the man who they were talking about. He raised his eyebrows, crossing his arms as he waited for one of them to speak. Kana glanced at Naruko, who grinned at the boy before gesturing for him to take a seat beside them. Shrugging his shoulders, Gray took a seat beside Naruko. So who's that good? Gray asked, frowning at the two of them. Kakashi. Naruko put down her sketchbook and pen. We're just talking about how no one in this guild had never ever seen him without his mask. Everyone in this guild had been trying in some way to find out what was behind his mask, but nothing everyone did have brought him to take the mask out. Why don't you guys use your own magic on him? Kana bit back a smile when she saw Naruko's eyes widening at his words. It seemed for once there was something that the younger girl hadn't figured out, but then again, she wondered why Naruko hadn't figured out to use her magic. Kakashi couldn't possibly have his mask on when the blonde girl used her magic. The mask would be destroyed just by the sheer intensity by Naruko's magic. The winds Naruko produced were ferocious and fierce, destroying everything in its path when not used properly. Naruko sighed. I can't use my magic because I'll destroy the guild or parts of the city, which means my grandfather would have no choice but to pay money for it. So, Kana chuckled at this while Naruko shot the boy a scowl, going on her usual rant about why she would never do such a thing. She had forgotten that not many people outside of the guild or new to the guild knew of Naruko's reluctance of destroying buildings. For as long as Kana could remember, there wasn't a time where Naruko had ever destroyed a building, not even by accident. The girl's love for her grandfather had outweighed any chance of her destroying the building. Naruko would never do anything to make her grandfather cry. I get it. Geez, don't give me a rant about it, Naruko. Well, you asked why the hell I wouldn't ever do something like that, didn't you, stripper? Of course I've to give you a rant about it because I thought I already told you that I would never destroy a building, Naruko said, crossing her arms. I won't ever do something that makes my grandfather have to pay money for it. I'm not like my cousin, Laxus. Laxus isn't that bad, Kana said, frowning. He made my grandfather pay 800,000 jewels. Do you know how much Gramps cried? Naruko shook her head. I swear these days, Gramps is crying more and more about money and I can't blame him. I would cry too if I had to pay money for damages that the guild makes. But it wouldn't be fun if there was no damages, Kana said, repeating the words her friend had said a few years ago. Where was the Naruko who didn't mind the damages? Where was the girl who always looked at the bright side? Naruko used to be able to laugh at these type of things. Do you want to see an old man cry because of the mistakes of someone younger than him? He could always make them pay for it. Do you really think that it is how that works? Kana shook her head and stared at the arguing kids. She had known Naruko for so long now and not once had she seen Naruko act like this. She had never argued with anyone before or gave anyone a nickname that fast before. She didn't know whether she should be amazed on how quickly Grace seemed to fit into Naruko's life or be worried about how fast Naruko was becoming friends with him. Then again, her best friend always seemed to have that effect on people. Look how long it took for Kakashi to fit into Naruko's life. In his first week in the guild, the blonde-haired girl had taken into following him. There was even a time when Naruko had actually decided to copy Kakashi's style, wearing a mask and all that. Obviously that didn't last long. The girl couldn't handle the lack of freedom or liked how people kept staring at her. She twirled her hair and observed as Naruko now argued with Gray about her eating habits and how it doesn't cost as much as the boy thought. Kana smiled softly at this. Her best friend was acting slowly like her old self with the boy. After what happened with Ivan, Naruko had changed. She got into more trouble, did a lot of pranks, rarely gave a real smile unless with her, Laxus, the master and of course Kakashi. Naruko skipped school more often and Kana hated this. The old Naruko would be surprised at what happened to her and would be completely disgusted in how she was behaving. The old Naruko gave a damn about how she acted and she always gave a real smile. She had never been the one to give fake smiles or to act so impolite. This Naruko didn't care about how she acted, and while Kana loved this part of her friend, she wished she took a little bit more caution for her behavior. All of the fights Naruko had gotten into had been dangerous. One wrong move and her friend could have died. It was almost like the blonde wanted to die through. She doubted this. Naruko knew how much it would kill her grandfather if she died. Everyone in the guild knew that the old man considered Naruko and Laxus were his light, his hope. I don't eat that much, Naruko said, crossing her arms as she scowled at the boy. Compared to some people, I eat so little. Compared to other girls, you eat a lot. Well, most girls do some crazy diet. Kakashi says he thinks it's nice I eat a lot, Naruko poked her tongue out. And he's older so he knows what he's talking about. He also reads those perverted books in public, Grace said, crossing his arms at her. So, Kana rolled her eyes at her friend's question. Naru, you've to admit Kakashi is weird, and so him saying that doesn't mean it isn't true. So you agree with Gray that I eat a lot? Well, you can eat 50 bowls of ramen if no one stops you. The blonde crossed her arms. I don't see what's wrong with that. Eating 50 bowls of ramen in just one sitting, Naru-chan, makes any person fat, Kana explained, rubbing her forehead. It's a miracle you aren't fat. That's because I exercise. Really exercise? Gray asked, looking at Naruko as if she was a weirdo. There was no way her doing exercise could explain how the girl hadn't gained weight. Why are you so shocked? Isn't it the same for you guys? Kana found herself twitching at her friend's question. It wasn't fair. If she ate as much as Naruko, then she would gain a lot more weight, and not in a good way even if she did exercise. Was it because of Naruko's genes? She could always ask Kakashi about whether or not the blonde mother was the same. Of course not, Whisker. Did you call me Whisker, stripper? You call me stripper. That's because you strip. Smiling, Kana observed as Naruko tried to change Gray's mind on the nickname. Her smile dropped when she noticed the smile on her friend's face as they argue. The smile on her friend's face was real, something she hadn't seen in 2 years. Blinking her eyes, Kana observed the smile on her friend's face. It was curled slightly and her eyes were closed, not wide and opened like her fake smiles were. For the first time in 2 years, Kana found herself smiling along with Naruko. Maybe Naruko would stop trying to pretend to be someone she was not, and just maybe she could see the remains of her friend who used to drag her by the ear to the playground. The friendship between Gray and Naruko showed her maybe, just maybe, not all hope was lost on Naruko. The Hokage-sama wished for me to inform you that they've found every spy and had dealt with them. He had also threatened the nations about attacking Naru-chan, so there will no need to be too concerned about her safety, but he'll send others to make sure that she's safe, Kakashi said, staring at the grim expression of Makarov. It was hard for him to believe the old man in front of him was his sensei's father. Where Minato was average in height, Makarov was tiny, and where his sensei was calm, his father easily loses his temper. It made him wonder how the two could be related. The only thing the two of them had in common was their thoughts on bombs. Makarov sighed. I wish it wouldn't have to resort to this, but I'm grateful. I don't know what went wrong with Ivan. He wasn't always like this, he used to be so much kinder. Kakashi nodded, glancing at the picture of his sensei and his brother before looking at the warm eyes of the guild master. He looked away. His eyes were so similar to his sensei that it hurt to look at it. It wasn't as bad as Naruko. The little girl just looked exactly like her father, from her blonde hair and blue eyes to how smart she could be. Now that the mission was over, he had to go back, and he didn't want to. Spending so much time with the guild helped him with his aching heart, especially whenever Guildarts was around. That man told him so many stories about his sensei that made him question what changed his sensei. This was a place he could see himself spending time in. He could see why his sensei had been pained to talk about his family. If he had a family like this, then he would feel a lot of pain for leaving them behind, and in a way he would. In a space of few years, he saw this whole guild as his family, with Makarov the grandfather he never had, and Naruko and her friends as the younger annoying siblings he would never have. What are you going to do when you go back to your village, Kakashi? Makarov grinned at the startled look. Got any girls waiting for you over there? I know almost all the girls in the guild are going to cry about you leaving. Kakashi found himself twitching at what Makarov was implying. I'll go back doing Anbu missions. There's no girl waiting for me there. You're still too stiff, Makarov commented, shaking his head. You shouldn't keep thinking about missions. You should think about enjoying your future. You only live once. I thought that's something every shinobi knows. Shinobi are tools to be used, Makarov-san. Doesn't mean you don't have emotions. The old man stared fondly at the picture of his grandchildren. I remember the letter Minato gave me when he told me he was going to be a father. I was so afraid that he would lose his emotions, that he would forget what was important, but the letter assured me he didn't forget. What was important? Friends and family, Makarov answered, and Kakashi found himself nodding his head. He did remember his sensei preaching to his old genin team about it. I told Minato when he was a little boy that a person becomes strong when they have something to protect. I told him it didn't matter the spells a person can use, because when someone have something to protect, then that's when they become strong. I think he was at his strongest when he was protecting Naru-chan from the Kyuubi. I know the little girl certainly had made me stronger. How can you stand looking at her? Kakashi asked, his eyes lingering at the picture of his smiling sensei. She looks like a female version of him, and she has his brain. The only thing she inherited from her mother was her love of pranks and ramen, as well as her temper. It hurts to look at her. Makarov took in a deep breath as he stared hard into the eyes of his son's student. How could he look at Naruko? That was a question he found easy to answer. It was because he no longer saw his son in his granddaughter. He was so used to her behavior that traits he thought belonged to Minato now seemed in his mind to fit in better with Naruko. The little girl had always made it so easy for him to forget about some of his son's traits. The only thing that he always associated with his son and granddaughter were their looks and brains, both being bright for their age but in completely different ways. Minato had been a genius as a shinobi, and he was proud of that, but Naruko wasn't. She was much more suited to magic. He might not have taught Naruko chakra, but he knew Kakashi did. After all, his granddaughter couldn't stop rubbing it in Lax's face through. They both knew Naruko would never use chakra. The girl saw no point in learning anything further than a few jutsu to Kakashi's disappointment. He wasn't going to force her to learn it. The blonde-haired girl had her own choice. It might hurt to look at her, but I think about the fact she isn't her parents. Makarov looked hard at the smiling faces of his sons. There are days when I think it's too painful to look at Naru-chan and Laxus. My granddaughter looks like a female version of her father, but her personality is more relaxed than what my son's personality ever was. Laxus looks nothing like his father, yet he acts the same way he does, but I know he won't become like his father. His love for the guild and for Naru-chan won't ever make him try to put the guild in danger. From the furrowed eyebrow, Makarov could tell Kakashi had his doubts about Laxus. In a way, he could see why. The older boy was now talking about how the older members of the guild were trash, but he knew it would go away. No, he prayed this phase would go away. If not for the guild's sake, then for Naruko and Laxus' sake. Their relationship was becoming more strained by the minute with how Laxus acted. He didn't want to see them being at their throats, especially considering how Naruko was starting to have a short temper. It must come from her mother's side of the family. Minato and his wife had never been short-tempered. A trait he had hoped that Naruko inherited, but it seemed like his hopes was dwindling each passing year. It would be a matter of time before someone get on the receiving side of Naruko's temper. Are you going to tell your goodbyes to them? Makarov asked as he watched Kakashi stand up from his seat. The silver-haired young man paused at this question, his hands clutching the door handle. Naru-chan will cry when you leave, and the same goes for Kana. Laxus might even be a little bit pissed since he saw you as someone that the guild members should aspire to be. I'll tell them, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to come visit, Kakashi admitted, and Makarov smiled. Your guild is really something, and I'm certain that the Hokage would like to know how Naruko is doing. She may not be living in the village, but there'll be people interested to know of her progress. She'll not return to your village. I know, but there might be a day when she'll want to, Kakashi stated calmly. I can see in her eyes that she's curious to know about Konoha, to see the village she was born in, but I don't see her going to visit now. Not with her friends being here or her worries for you. I don't know why my granddaughter worries about me, I'm fit as a fiddle. Kakashi chuckled. Well, as Naruko would like to say, you're not getting any younger and your drinking habits will be your downfall. Makarov snorted at this, but he knew this would be something his granddaughter would say to him. It was sweet of her to care, but he was a grown man. He knew what the consequences was and he didn't care. No matter how many times Naruko tried to hide his stash of alcohol, it wouldn't stop him from drinking. He sighed. At least the caring nature of his granddaughter would never change. You're leaving. Why? What's wrong with our guild? Naruko cried when Kakashi announced to her, Kana and Gray, that he was going back home. Kana was sniffling, rubbing her watery eyes while Gray rubbed his neck, uncertain on what he should do to cheer up the two girls. This wasn't something he had ever dealt with before. Naruko and Kana don't cry, especially Naruko, since the blonde didn't seem to know the meaning of tears. Gray glanced around hoping to find Laxus. The guy may be a bastard, but he did know how to calm Naruko down, but there was no sign of him. Great. Now he was going to deal with a crying Naruko, and it was all thanks to Kakashi. I have to go back to Konoha, Naru-chan, Kakashi said, kneeling down till he was at eye level with the teary-eyed girl. She rubbed her eyes, lips formed into a pout before looking at him with wide eyes as she waited for him to explain. I came here because I had a job to do, and that job is done. It's my duty as a shinobi to go back home. I've to give reports to the Hokage. But can't you stay here after you give him your reports? Naruko pleaded, looking down at her foot while Kana leaned closer, rubbing her friend's back and giving Gray a look that said he needed to help her comfort Naruko. After a moment of hesitance, Gray awkwardly patted the blonde's shoulder, causing said blonde to smile at him. I can't just stay here because you want me to, Naru-chan, Kakashi said, and he winced at the sorrowful expression made by his sensei's daughter. I've got a job to do, and if I stay here then I'll be seen as a nuke nin. Remember what I told you about them? That they're bad? Naruko asked hesitantly. Kakashi sighed while Kana and Gray shook their heads at their friend, unsurprised at her answer while looking at the older man with curiosity. They're also hunted by hunter nins. Kakashi ruffled her hair, causing her to give him an irritated look. If I stay here then they might come here, and you don't want that. The world of the shinobi isn't nice. If they think you guys are helping me then they might do something to harm the guild members. Do you want that Naruko? Naruko shook her head. The guild came first and there was no way she could let the guild members get hurt because of her selfish desire to see Kakashi stay here with her. If they ever got hurt then she would never be able to live with herself. You must always protect your friends and comrades. This was something her grandfather told her daily and a thought that Kakashi had often reinforced whenever they did missions together. The two of them almost always did missions together. But who can I do missions with? Naruko asked, rubbing her eyes as she stared at the man who she came to admire. Laxus is a meanie. Kana won't let me do the fun missions. You always pick the missions that screams danger. Kana interjected. Because they bring in the most money and we all know we need a lot of money if we're going to share an apartment with each other, Naruko said, crossing her arms while Kakashi and Gray stared at each other. Naru-chan, what makes you think I'm going to stay with you? Because you love me. Kana rolled her eyes. Don't roll your eyes on me, Kana-chan. You know as well as me you can't imagine a life without me. Kakashi bit his lips from saying a comment that would surely get Naruko angry and ready to hit him in the face. It might not look like it, but the blonde had inherited her mother's scary strength and temper. He really did pity the poor man who would ever marry the girl. His eyebrows twitched. If Naruko was ever going to marry, then that would mean she would date. If she dates, then that mean there was a chance her boyfriend might be a bastard. No, he couldn't let Naruko date. He needed someone to prevent the girl from dating. But who could he ask? Kakashi didn't trust Laxus, not with the way he acted, and while he knew the boy cared about his cousin, he wasn't certain if he cared enough to protect her. He couldn't beg Makarov because the old man already had too much in his plate and wouldn't mind too much of his granddaughter dating or might be too overprotective of the girl. Scratch that, the old man was going to be overprotective. Who could he ask to make sure Naruko remains innocent? There was no one he could trust, but if Naruko was anything like her mother, then there was nothing for him to worry about. Oh come on Kana, I can't stay with Gramps and Laxus for the rest of my life. Naruko cried, snapping Kakashi from his train of thought. Gray rubbed his forehead and gestured for him to stop the blonde from continuing their argument. I can't live with only guys. And you know how much a pervert they are. Can't you take mercy on your loving friend and agree to live with her when we're older? Kana sighed. Alright, we'll live together, but you're going to be the one to tell Master you're moving out and you'll deal with his tears by yourself. And you're going to do some chores too. Naruko grinned and jumped on Kana, yelling out how she was her savior and how she would repay her in any way she could, while Gray stared at the pair of them as if they were weirdos. Kakashi chuckled. He was going to miss the pair antics. There was something about the way they acted that made him wonder if he would act like Kana if Obito was alive. He probably would act like Kana, maybe even harsher, but there was no denying that Kana and Naruko cared for each other. What did Naruko tell him? The two of them had been best friends since forever and that nothing could ever rip their friendship apart. For the young girl's sake, he hoped it was true. But knowing Naruko, she would make sure her friendship with Kana would stay strong and that she would never ever act like the other girls. In that way, he knew he could depend Naruko to keep a good head on her shoulder. Hey Kakashi-san, if you're not going to stay then you'll at least visit us, right? Naruko asked, jumping off Kana and slinging her arm around Gray, who had lost his shirt. The blonde flickered her eyes at Gray's bare chest, sighing at what happened before scanning the room to find his shirt. When she found it beside one of the stools, she rushed off to go get it, leaving Gray, Kana and Kakashi alone together. You're going to visit us, right, Kakashi-san? Kana asked, staring wide-eyed. We really likes it when you play with us and the stories you tell us about Naru-chan's parents. We want to learn more. And you'll bring presents when you come to visit us, right? Kakashi rubbed his neck. I'm going to visit. I don't think I can leave Naru-chan alone for too long, right? You need a rest from looking after her. Kana shrugged. Yeah, but I got Gray to help me with Naru-chan now. This earned a raised eyebrow from said boy, who bristled at the comment. And what makes you think I'm going to help you with Naruko, huh? Because we both know she's the only thing that can make you smile, Kana retorted, causing the boy to grunt and for Kakashi to chuckle. Besides, would you like to deal with her being annoyed whenever Laxus says something stupid or the master doing something perverted? The old man might have sense not to do it in front of Naru-chan, but Naru-chan does know how the old man acts. Besides, we both don't want a sad Naruko. She can be quite difficult to deal with when she is in that state, Kakashi admitted, rubbing his neck as he remembered the blonde's behavior. If you think she was bad crying just now, Gray, then you won't be able to deal with a really sad Naru-chan. Gray gulped. How bad is it? Bad enough for Makarov to get worried, Kakashi informed him soberly, and this caused Gray to raise an eyebrow. If she gets really sad, I'm afraid hell may break loose. I'm afraid there might be a day where he'll get angry if Naru-chan becomes too sad. You're making that up. Kakashi kept his face neutral, making the younger boy gulp even more. He knew the younger boy must have heard stories about how frightening the guild master could be when angered. Though most of the stories were exaggerated, it did hold some truth. The truth was Makarov was a scary man when angered, a man who he knew Konoha must not make an enemy of. Not that he thought the Hokage would get into a fight with Makarov. The Hokage knew better than to get into fights, but he did fear what the council would do to get Naruko. It was barely a secret that Danzo was furious with Sarutobi for giving Naruko to her grandfather and not to be raised in Konoha. There was always a chance that those people will be after the blonde. If the rumors were true, then it would be a matter of time before Danzo might try to get his hands on Naruko. How the hell did your shirt got all the way to the bar stool, stripper? Naruko asked, throwing the dark blue shirt to Gray. The older boy immediately caught it, putting it on while Kakashi shook his head at the pair of them. One of these days we're going to break you of that habit, or the very least, find a way to make you conscious of your actions. It could get you into trouble one of these days. What kind of trouble can I get in with this habit? Fangirls, Kakashi immediately answered. The three kids stared at him as if he was joking, but the young man only shuddered, remembering his few experiences with them as well as seeing Itachi Uchiha running from his own club. Never be said, fangirls were vicious creatures and would do anything to get what they want. If they found out there was a good-looking boy that had a stripping habit, then they would chase after him. He had no doubt about that. Well, I better go, Kakashi said, glancing at his watch before ruffling Naruko's blonde hair. And I'll see you guys sometime soon. Who knows, I might bring you presents. And maybe a girlfriend, but we all know that isn't going to happen. Kana and Gray laughed while Kakashi pouted at her comment. Now that's being mean, Naru-chan. Kana and Gray sniggered. At least I'm not the one who has a boyfriend that strips. She isn't my boyfriend, girlfriend. Naruko and Gray yelled in unison, causing Kakashi to chuckle and for Kana to giggle at their antics. To be young and in denial, Kakashi sang as he went out of the door. Naruko grabbed the nearest object and hurled at Kakashi's direction, only for him to duck it. He chuckled. Yeah, he was going to miss doing this to the pair of them, but who said he couldn't tease them next year, huh? Who knows, maybe next year, he could get Kana to help him with teasing the two of them and give him blackmail material, especially on Gray. Kakashi just had a feeling that he needed to be extra careful with that one. Thanks.